Let me start with how climate change is affecting food security. And this is a summary from the IPCC Special Report on Climate Change and Land, which was published in 2019. Climate change affects food security in a number of ways, through availability, with its effects on crop and livestock yield, growing periods, land degradation, harvest loss associated with disease. It affects utilization because of decreased nutritional capacity or decreased nutritional value of food that's produced, through adverse weather effects on food storage, through higher post-harvest loss, through negative impacts on food safety. It affects access through price signals, also through loss of agricultural income and disproportionate impact on low-income people and households. And it also affects stability from disruption of food supply through adverse weather, civil disturbance, social tension, through yield variability, through crop failure due to drought. And the IPCC sort of summarized the food instability with this, what they call a burning embers diagram. And the way to read this is on the vertical axis, you have temperature. And your temperature going 1 degree, 1.5, 2 degrees, 3, 4, higher than background temperature. And as the diagram gets more purple, the situation gets more dire. And you can see that we are rapidly approaching the 1.5 mark, which is the transition from high impact to very high impact. So we're very quickly approaching the very high impact of climate change on food system stability. Why a food systems approach? This is being discussed a lot here at COP. It's fairly controversial. But the way we think about food systems as a way of formulating solutions is through integrating across systems, understanding things from a systems perspective, understanding that changes in one part of the food system have impacts elsewhere. And if we're going to be decoupling emissions from development, we really need to take a systems approach, because we could end up with undesirable consequences through repercussions and impacts elsewhere in the system. So we know that food systems are responsible for about 22 to 35% of anthropogenic emissions. This is all summaries from the IPCC Special Report on Climate Change and Land. The little numbers after indicate where you can find the background science to this in the summary for policymakers. So 22 to 35% of emissions come from food systems, and these are projected to increase by about 30 to 40% by 2050. We know that climate change also creates additional stresses on food systems, and at 2 degrees C, the risk to food system instability is very high. Okay? So the integrated supply and demand options needed to address these issues can be scaled up in all segments of the food systems, that all segments of the food system have elements of solution to them. Diversification in the food system can reduce risks from climate change, and dietary change can ease economic burdens of ill health and caused by malnutrition. So there are positive aspects of dealing with this. We often see mitigation as a trade-off and having negative impacts, but there are opportunities for decoupling emissions from development and from economic development, and finding ways to have positive impacts elsewhere in the system. The importance of doing this is through integrated policies that operate across the food system. Let me talk a little bit about emissions, and this is from a paper by Monica Crippa at the EU. And what she shows here is that there's a significant difference between industrialized and developing countries. And I would point, first of all, in the outside portion of these circles. We're not going to go into the inside in this particular talk. But if you look at the outer portion of the circles, the industrialized countries have a much greater energy footprint in their food systems, whereas developing countries have a much lower one. Developing countries have a much greater land use impact, and we all know about the problems of deforestation associated with commodity production in the tropics. And so that's what that represents. But it's also interesting, as this is the order of magnitude difference between developing countries and industrialized countries. Part of this is the fact that most people in the world live in developing countries. The other part is that many developed countries outsource food to developing countries, and this gets counted in the way we do greenhouse gas accounting. It gets counted in national greenhouse gas inventories of developing countries. Food systems and related solutions to mitigate climate change can be found in 4 areas: improving the efficiency of food production, avoiding and reversing deforestation, land degradation, and desertification, consumption of healthy and sustainable diets, and minimizing food loss and waste. I think at least in the first 2, you can see opportunities for positive impacts on human well-being and livelihoods by improving efficiency of food production and reversing land degradation and desertification, but also in consumption of healthy diets with its impact on human health. Let me just give one example of opportunities for emissions reductions that are in this case, methane from enteric fermentation from livestock production. And a colleague of mine at ILRI, the International Livestock Research Institute, just conducted a study that was published last year, where she looked at different options for mitigating enteric fermentation and methane production, either through animal feed management, and she looked at a number of technologies for animal feed management, a number of technologies associated with diet formulation and ways diets can be changed, and some rumen manipulation. Many of these, not all of these, but many of these actually are specifically agroecological types of approaches. And so that there are some ways of doing this. And what she showed was that agricultural methane emissions need to decrease by 11-30% of 2010 levels by 2030, and by 24 to 47 by 2050 if we're going to meet the 1.5 degree C target. Okay? And I think the magnitudes of the percentages speak to the unlikely possibility of achieving this, right? Globally, she found 100% of adoption of the most effective product-based and absolute emissions reduction strategies are required to meet 1.5 degree C target by 2030, and even this will not be sufficient by 2050. And 100% is, where'd it go? Oh, can you guys still see it? Okay, I just lost it from my screen. And so the idea is that if 100% is required, which is extremely unlikely, and we're not even likely to make it by 2050, we need innovation in this sector in order to achieve the outcomes. The mitigation effects, by and large, that impede us from reaching the objectives are offset of emissions reductions through increasing milk and meat demand as population grows and as diets change. And notably by 2030 and 2050, low and middle income countries may not meet their contribution to 1.5 degree C target for this reason, whereas high income countries could meet their contributions due only to minor projected increase in enteric methane from emissions, but keeping in mind that these countries are often outsourcing their meat and milk products to other countries. So the second thing that's also important for agroecology ecology is the idea of sinks, and many of the practices that increase sinks in agricultural landscapes are agroecological practices. Afforestation, reforestation has a very large potential. This again comes from the IPCC Special Report on Climate Change and Land. And forest management has a potential, but things like agroforestry, soil carbon sequestration in croplands, soil carbon sequestration in grazing lands, all have the potential of removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and creating sinks and helping improve the sustainability while improving soil health and while improving agroecosystem health. So a little bit on agroecology. So the CGIAR is currently implementing what we call a living landscape approach or a living lab approach. We have multiple initiatives that are engaged in this. This is participatory research scaled up. You know, we do a lot of work directly with farmers, and now we are reaching out to a wide range of stakeholders in food systems through multi-stakeholder platforms, through participatory research, through consultation, where we try and turn the tables and put the scientist on equal footing with other players in the food system, where we work with them to understand what they're trying to achieve, and then we try and support what other stakeholders are trying to achieve through the provision of science, knowledge, information, and also supporting equity and equitable development by understanding issues like gender, youth, employment, and how marginalized groups are affected, understanding the impacts of the types of changes that we're looking at in agroecosystems, and how these are likely to affect these different groups, and how we can actually try and deploy these technologies and approaches for more equitable outcomes. So it's about equity, efficiency, and cost effectiveness across the agroecosystem. And I just want to say a couple of words on equity. So we do have a number of studies going on, and we'll hear a bit more about this in the course of the day. But we are finding that in a number of studies across the countries that we're working in, that young women and men are moving away from agriculture in the rural space. I think anybody who spends any time in rural areas in many developing countries is keenly aware of this. I've seen it over the past 30 years. Participation in collective action groups seem to be dominated by older farmers in many landscapes. But there's a desire of people in these landscapes to support young people, to create incentives for them to invest in rural areas and continue to work in the agricultural area to improve the development of these areas. And what agriculture does, and specifically agroecology has to offer, is a big question that we'll be addressing today in this forum, and looking at what role cooperatives and women's collective action groups can play in this transition. So I'm just putting this out here as a question. Are women, youth, and other groups more at risk for climate change? I think the answer by and large is yes, and we know this. We'll hear more evidence about this. We'll also hear from some of our speakers today about what they're doing to improve understanding of this and to improve the response of development actions to this. And I want to just close with, it's essential for us to be able to decouple development from greenhouse gas emissions in all sectors. And the land sector is unique in that it's absolutely essential that we continue to have development in this area. It's a major source of greenhouse gas emissions currently, and it doesn't need to continue to be as important a source. And there are things that we can do that both improve human well-being and livelihoods and create the agroecological transition that needs to happen. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Lou, for the framing. Thank you. I forgot to mention that this event is being brought to you by the Agroecology Coalition in partnership with the Alliance of Bioversity and CIAT, with WWF, and with Biovision Foundation. I am Oliver Oliveras, coordinator of the coalition, and I'll be the moderator for today's session. Thanks again, Lou, and I'll turn over the floor then to our speakers with us today who provide their reaction and perspectives on what Lou has just presented and on the topic. On my right is Natasha Urlemans, who is with the WWF Netherlands, and she is heading the Food and Agriculture Unit of WWF Netherlands. Sitting next to her is Francisco Rosado May. He is a Yucatec Maya who is also the founding president of the Universidad Intercultural de Maya de Quintero Roo in Mexico. And his research is essentially looking at agroecological principles applied to the design and management of sustainable food systems with an intercultural approach. We'll probably hear about that later on. Sitting next to Francisco is Rietveld from Alliance of Bioversity CIAT. She's an associate scientist, and she is working on interdisciplinary science, specializing in gender, social equity, farming systems research, inclusive scaling of agricultural innovations, and sustainable agricultural intensification. We also have discussants who is joining us online, Monica Kobayashi. Monica, welcome. Is joining us from Canada. Monica is the Program Management Officer for Agricultural Biodiversity at the Convention on Biological Diversity, CBD. And hopefully joining us soon, because he's traveling from Nairobi to Rwanda, is a Tanzanian Muzuna Kamwesige Mutembe, who is the agroecology focal point, but he's also been instrumental in the establishment and hopefully the implementation of Tanzania's National Ecological Organic Agriculture Strategy from the Ministry of Agriculture in Tanzania. Let me turn the floor now to maybe we'll start with, Natasha, and then Francisco, and then Anne, maybe some opening statements and feedback and reaction to what Louis has just presented, and also bringing in your perspectives from where you are sitting.
Okay. Thank you all. Thank you for the invitation to speak. I'm working for the Worldwide Fund for Nature. And we are a nature conservation organization. And often the question I get is, why do you work on agriculture? And why do you work on agroecology? Well, for us, agroecology is a really important part of our nature conservation strategy, especially in the areas where we still have pristine habitats for wildlife and forest. So think of the Amazon, think of the Congo Basin, think of the forest of Borneo, and especially in the deforestation zones. And especially in the wildlife corridors, we see that mimicking nature in the form of agroecology, where nature is an ally instead of an enemy of food production, can be both good for livelihoods, and it can be good for increasing and restoring biodiversity. And we as a nature conservation organization think it's very important that that we can conserve nature together with the people that are already responsible for preserving it for centuries. So what we are trying to do is threefold. We are trying with agroecology to help farmers, local communities and indigenous peoples with land use planning and mainly land rights, and especially for women in those areas, because land rights often will also enhance the care for agricultural land and will make sure that you can improve harvest, that you can improve productivity without having the fear that you are being cleared in the future. So land use planning, and especially organizing land use right by being a convener between governments and local communities, is an important part of our role in these areas. The second one is knowledge, training and innovation, and especially combining new techniques with indigenous knowledge. Training farmers, making sure that the most advanced ideas can be utilized and that it can also be supported. And the last one, and I think that's really an important one, is access to finance. Because we see that one of the struggles for accelerating agroecology in these areas is access to markets, but also access to other forms of benefits, such as, for instance, payment for environmental services. And we also see that transition costs are now mainly the risk of farmers, instead of the risk of us as society or of market parties such as businesses. So we are working with farmers to establish cooperatives, for instance, on cacao and coffee, and looking for international markets. And we are trying also to engage governments. So why are we here on this climate COP is because we think that agroecology needs to be part of the nationally determined contributions of countries, because that will unlock climate finance. We also think that there would be huge potential to have it in the national adaptation plans of governments, because agroecology is a form of climate adaptation. It makes farmers more resilient, and I think we will talk later about it. And the last one, I think it's a huge opportunity as well for the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plans, the NBSEPs, that are part of the Global Biodiversity Framework, which is core business for WWF, but target number 10 is about sustainable agriculture. And we think combining these three is ticking all the boxes, both for agroecology, for food security, and for biodiversity preservation. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Natasha. Francisco.
Thank you, Oliver, and thank you for having the opportunity to share some experience we have. I had thought of a different participation, but when I saw the data that was shared with us, we're just going to change it a little bit, and with an anecdote. And I had the honor to lead a team of people that made possible the opening of an intercultural university for the Yucatec Maya. I am a Yucatec Maya. It was important. When the university was discussing, when we were discussing with the federal government what measures should we offer, I immediately put on the table that agroecology has to be one of the first measures for the university. But the federal government didn't like the idea, based on another fact. They said that the number of students in Mexico, I'm talking about 2006, more or less, 2005, 2006, and the data showed that the young people willing to study agronomy was declining in the country. So they thought it would be a bad idea to have agroecology because nobody would study agroecology. But I insisted and I won the battle. We had agroecology, and boom, it was one of the most popular majors in the university. Why? Because the people in the government didn't know what we knew. Agroecology offers something to the young people that they can identify with in a different way than just agronomy in itself. Agroecology was part of their values and the vision that they had on how to produce food and how to conserve nature. And we have had very good results of this process. With the research that we do, and I bring this concept of interculturality here, it's we offer a safe space in which different ways of learning, creating, innovating, and transmitting knowledge can coexist. And that means science and the local ways of creating knowledge, the indigenous ways, the Maya, Yucatec Maya ways. And the university was the safe space. And given those conditions, then we started to understand much better our own systems. And from that understanding, we are ready now to move to the next step, which is the co-creation of knowledge, much needed to transform, and luckily, with the, hopefully with the agroecological approach, to transform the broken food systems. And I have to say also that not because we are indigenous peoples farming in what we call traditional, we cannot consider that those are sustainable systems. Many of the systems that indigenous peoples are now working with are broken systems. They also need to be transformed. And the best way to do that, of course, will be with an intercultural approach, combining science with the local knowledge. And let me provide you some examples of this. When a Maya farmer plans the farming, they do planning, believe it or not, we have to identify what is the guiding idea, what is underlying that guides their actions and decisions. And after some years of research, we found it with a saying that goes like this: when I think of my farming for next year, I want to make sure that I can produce enough food for my family and my animals and part of the community without having to depend on others or the government. Right there. That's the thinking that guides, and I'm sure it's in many other indigenous communities, their actions and decisions. What it's saying is a combination of food security, food sufficiency, and food sovereignty. But when programs designed by the government or other institutions come only with one of these three concepts, they don't resonate with the people. And that's the kind of research, and I can provide some other examples of more technical type of research, more kind of hard sciences type of research. But this gives you an example of how we can build bridges, and by building bridges, then we're ready to co-create. That's what the intercultural approach to education is achieving. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francisco. Anne?
Yes, thank you, Oliver. Yeah, we are talking about low and equitable low-emission food systems through agroecology. And of course, we can say a lot about justice and equity in relation to this. But for now, I would like to focus on gender equality, because currently we don't really have gender equality in many places in the world. And we know that in relation to climate crisis, women tend to be less resilient than men, compared to men. And this has been said many times, amongst others by Lou just now. And yet, when we discuss these issues and we talk about gender equality and about possible solutions, we often get stuck in platitudes about, yes, we have to do something, but without really operationalizing what has to be done. And also, I think, without really trying to understand what underlies these, in this inequality between women and men. And a major factor in which underlies this inequality is gender norms that restrict, especially women and girls, from engaging in food systems. And this impedes their resilience. And gender norms, they are the unwritten rules that shape the behavior of women and men. And this is often culturally specific. But they also shape how women and men are valued and what appropriate conduct is for women and men, for instance. And not only by communities or by your family, but also how you value yourself. For instance, do you value yourself for being here on stage, speaking at COP28, or do you value yourself when you are at home, taking care of your kids, maybe buying a Christmas tree and decorating your home? So what I'm trying to say is that gender norms, they are very personal. We all live gender norms and we all have an idea how it should be and how it shouldn't be. And at the same time, they're also very political because essentially gender norms also speak about power. So it's not easy to address gender norms. And we have done a study recently trying to identify which gender norms across different regions in low and middle income countries are really most determined or dominant in restricting women's resilience. And I won't list all of these norms now because we obviously don't have time for that. But one of these gender norms is, for instance, that men are primary income winners in their household. So men are usually expected to engage in commercial agriculture and to engage in high value chains, whereas conversely, women are often locked into low production or low productivity value chains or in low value chains, which means that they have fewer opportunities, for instance, to diversify their livelihoods and to expand their opportunities in the case of increased stress due to climate change. You know, back to the food systems and agroecology, I think that, and Lou already mentioned a few of the things that we are doing in both the initiative, the CGIAR initiative on low emission food system development and the initiative on agroecology. But when we think about interventions or policies, and I think this, you know, should be the case for all the organizations that are represented here and probably also in NDCs, is that we really need to make a conscious effort to understand and also then respond to how these policies and interventions are interacting with dominant gender norms in that specific context. And we also have to be aware of these gender norms, not only on the ground, in the communities and with the people with whom we work, but also in our own institutions. And that, I think, is often lacking. And then in relation to agroecology and why justice and equity are especially, you know, could be achieved or at least approached through agroecology, I think that, you know, agroecology is quite unique in the sense that, you know, on the premise of it being a holistic and systemic approach, that it has a vision on how the food system should look, right? And I think it's really important that when we talk about agroecology, we don't lose ourselves in discussions on agricultural practices only, or focus only on the environment, but we do really keep that emphasis also on the social dimensions.
Fantastic,
So
thanks very much, and that really illustrates how holistic the approach is, right? We will open the floor in a few minutes. Please hold on to your questions and comments, but I just wanted to to link in our friends who are joining us virtually. I'll start with Monica Kobayashi. Monica, are you able to hear us?
Yes.
Fantastic.
Can you hear me?
Fantastic. Monica, please, what's your take on what you have just heard from Lou's framing and on this specific topic on low-emission food systems through agroecology?
Thank you very much for this invitation. And I will try to build on what colleagues said. So from the CBD perspective, achieving a just, equitable, and low-emission food system is possible. And agroecology is one of these pathways. Right now, we are facing important global crises, including water, biodiversity loss, climate, and pollution crisis. And in this scenario, food production became a challenge. Also in this scenario, we all trying to help the most vulnerable people that face the major challenges. So I believe that we are all working together to achieve the SDGs and to defend the human rights. For instance, the right for food, the right for clean water and sanitation, and more recently, the right for health and clean and sustainable environment. So I think if we look at the intersection of the human rights, we can see clearly the role of agriculture, including agroecology, to first support climate change mitigation adaptation, to achieve food security and nutrition, to better manage water use and other inputs, including fertilizers and pesticides, and also to reduce the impact on biodiversity. So going back to the panel theme about the justice, equitable, and low-emission food systems, this goes hand in hand with biodiversity, conservation, and sustainable use. As previous colleagues mentioned, many people depend on biodiversity for their livelihoods. And ultimately, the loss of biodiversity impacts our lives on this planet. So with this sense of urgency, a year ago, countries adopted the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework with the aim to address this urgency to bend the curve of biodiversity loss. The framework is based on a human-based approach and also is people-oriented. The 23 targets are all interlinked and invite us to break silos, to have this multi-stakeholder approach. So what is the role of agroecology in the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework? Agroecology, agroforestry, and other innovative approaches, they play a fundamental role in helping to bend the curve of biodiversity loss and to put the planet back on the recovery path, including through the conservation of genetic resources, the reduction of the main drivers of biodiversity loss, and promoting sustainable production. So agroecology can help us to design the agricultural system to be a solution to those global challenges, and also to improve productivity to achieve food security and nutrition. Specifically, the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework targets 10 focus on agriculture, fisheries, aquaculture, and forestry. However, target 10 by itself cannot be successful. We need all the other targets connected, including target 1 on spatial planning, target 4 on genetic resources, target 7 on pollution, target 8 on climate change, target 22 on indigenous people, local communities, and traditional knowledge, target 23 on gender equality, for instance. We need to leverage synergies to achieve the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, but also the SDGs. So we all together, we leave no one behind, and we can live in harmony with nature. Thank you.
Much, Monica. I think it's very important that you've highlighted that it's not, if you are in a restaurant, it's not a menu you can pick and choose. It's not a la carte. It's a fixed menu, essentially. It's how to be all linked together. Let's us have some perspective from national governments at the country level, from our friend in Tanzania. Are you able to hear us, Kamusige?
Yeah, I can hear you. I don't know if you can hear me.
We can hear you very well. Please, your take from where you are sitting as a national government at the Ministry of Agriculture.
Yeah, thank you very much, Oliver. Actually, I resonate a lot what Monica have just said. To us in the Ministry of Agriculture, but in Tanzania, agroecology has emerged as a cross-cutting multifunctional tool advancing food security, farm income, soil restoration, climate resilience, biodiversity, and participation in different growing markets, which are now in the growing global markets. And for us, we have our farmers are mostly characterized as smallholder farmers, and most of these needs different options to deal with food security, but also with other challenging issues like livelihood and others. And so we had to develop a strategy which can bring into farmers' activities, but also at the same time being able to protect biodiversity and the ecology. And that's why we developed the ecological organic agriculture strategy. And as according to the theme, we are trying very much to see on those old practices that can administer or reduce production of emission within the agriculture sector. While we are still not obligated to report on the emissions from the agriculture sector, but we are preparing ourselves and being able to witness on all the effects being brought by the greenhouse gases. And according to the IPCC, the way we manage soils is a great factor on the sequestering of emissions, all production of emissions. So we are trying to advocate a lot on all those practices, conservation agriculture practices and other practices that will increase soil carbon, and so making soil more sequester more carbon and being able to administer low emissions from soil. But from there, we are also trying to see on how farmers can be able to get support on the inputs they use by being able to use inputs that are available in their surroundings. So trying to put strategies or trying to put all those plans to be able to get bio inputs, being able to research, more research and production of biopesticides and others, so that they can be, which are more affordable to farmers and they can use them. And also these farmers they still need livelihoods, so they have to they are looking for different kinds of markets out there, and they are a growing market of organic products that makes them need the support of the whole value chain in terms of inputs, but also research. So the strategy mainly looks on those and trying to make farmers be able to produce more organically, but also to produce more according to what is in their surroundings, but also at the same time being able to protect the biodiversity. Thank you for now.
Very much for bringing in that perspective. We will open the floor now for a few questions from the audience. Let's flip the conversation from this side to that side. Anyone from the audience who would like to ask a question or react to any of the feedback provided by the speakers at this point? Or anybody who would like to share? Yes, please, can you state your name and, okay, we don't, oh yeah, there you go, thank you.
Yeah, I'm Duncan Williamson. I'm the Global Food Systems Lead for Forum for the Future. And we are a systems transformation organization, been working for like 30 years. And one of the 3 priority changes that we're looking at is food system transformation. And we have an office in Southeast Asia. And we have been working on the protein challenge and food security in Southeast Asia now for 5 years. And what we're trying to do now is engage the finance sector in agroecology. We've found it's very easy on protein transition to raise funds and interest from banks and development banks on alternate proteins, cellular meat, that sort of thing. They're interested in it, they'll invest in it, they engage it really, really, really quickly. And some of them we know have actually made good investments on the advice we gave them, which wasn't our aim. We are struggling now to get the same group of people interested in agroecological solutions across Southeast Asia. And do you have any ideas of how we could do that? Because we've been trying, we're going to keep trying, but it is proving a stumbling block because there's no short-term rewards that they can quantify, and that they don't like, and we keep hearing that we need to unlock finance in this sector.
Thank you. Anybody from the group? Yes, Natasha.
Yeah, this is kind of the same challenge, of course, that is happening everywhere in the world and not in Southeast Asia. And I'm happy to tell you that from WWF, we started an initiative which is called the TNFD, the Task Force of Nature-Related Risk Disclosures, where we ask financial institutions and banks to assess and monitor their risks related to loss of natural resources. By the idea that if they have to monitor it, assess it, and disclose it, that it's also a way of talking about the risks on the long term for investing in non-sustainable agricultural practices. And this is, I agree, it's a first step, but we already see in working with the Agricultural Bank in the Netherlands and having these discussions about risks related to agricultural practices that are unsustainable and that are leading to degradation of soils, for instance, or are leading to further deforestation, that the bank is interesting to see how they can do their loan assessments, which are now mostly based on short-term profits, how they can change it and have other types of indicators in their loan assessments. And I agree it's a first step, but I think it's a beginning. And I think we need to accelerate, and I think showing as well, and this is maybe a case I can show in the Netherlands, we have shown that farmers who are operating more sustainably friendly are also economically more viable and more resilient. And I think another solution can be reporting these cases and making these showcases more available to also to financial institutions.
Thanks very much. Financing is obviously a very important aspect of, we see a lot of calls for increased access to finance, particularly by the smallholders. Any other questions or reaction from the floor? Yes, Joshua.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Agroecology Coalition and the partners for organizing this event. My name is Joshua Aijuka. I work with Participatory Ecological Land Use Management, but also a member of Agroecology Coalition. I co-facilitate the implementation working group. I just have one, in the context of the space we are in, the negotiations. I think for me, that's where I was hoping we could further drive this debate, because I believe a number of us in this room are quite convinced of the potential that agroecology as a systemic and holistic approach has to offer towards, transforming our food systems towards low emission systems and the like. For me, the issue is, how do we accelerate the inclusion of agroecology in the climate negotiation space? One area, of course, the work stream on agriculture. We saw there was a stallment there. We couldn't progress that much in the negotiations. And we know that the adaptation window is closing, especially for the more vulnerable countries. So how then, as the coalition, as the international organizations, CG centers, WWF, how do we use the evidence that we have? How do we engage and influence the negotiators, the countries, even those that actually have already strategy, like Tanzania, at the negotiation level? How are they advancing this process? EU was doing a good job initially. I remember in previous SB, really pushing for agroecology and food systems to be included. But up to now, even in the global stocktake, you can hardly find agroecology in the draft text. So I think for me, we need to use this space to really see how we can unconventionally influence these processes. You know, we have a number of countries that have signed up to the coalition, Agroecology Coalition. To what extent are they actually actively supporting integration of agroecology in these spaces? But also now, when we go to implementation, it's still a challenge. Like you talked, I think we had a lot of submissions talking about the multi-sectoral approaches. You know, like the what was it called? The intercultural approaches and the like. These are very good approaches, but you know how most of our systems are actually quite segmented, often working in silos. So one of the issues that we are facing, even with the food system approach, is where do you anchor agroecology and food systems? We're having the same challenges. In Uganda, we are developing the National Agroecology Strategy. But the moment you step out of the Ministry of Agriculture, a particular department, probably crop production department, then all the other sectors are actually trying to catch up, to just understand how do we anchor such a holistic in the systemic approach in a very disjointed system. You know, how do we influence such processes? So I think we need a lot of ideas in those areas. Otherwise, this is a very good event, and really appreciate for the organizers. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Joshua. Any quick take on that one? And
Well, maybe I can respond to what you were saying about evidence and what are the CG centers doing. I have less of a response, I guess, on the negotiations, but I don't think that at this moment we really do have enough convincing evidence, and we really need to get a better story, and we really need to get examples from more places. We don't have the same basis of, for instance, when it comes to productivity, but also to the other benefits that we think and we promise or argue that agroecology might offer. We don't have the evidence base that we need probably. So I think that is important. But something which I did notice these last couple of days, and I'm still not really convinced if it's a good development, but we don't maybe hear so much about agroecology, but I did hear all the time about regenerative agriculture. And of course that is like, a bit of a depoliticized version of agroecology, but it does show that some of these aspects of agroecology are becoming more mainstream, right? And they are being picked up. So I do think that, I mean, maybe it's not going fast enough or not as fast as we want, but I do think there is a shift and there is more interest and there is more buy-in, at least from, also large agriculture or agri-food-based companies to invest in agroecological practices. But as I also said in my opening statement, we do have to ensure that we don't, that the emphasis is not only on the agricultural practices, but that we also keep emphasizing the social and of course also the environmental dimensions.
Thanks, Anne. Francisco, what's your take on the evidence part from indigenous people's perspective?
Sure. I would like to mention also that during the discussions for the summit, food summit, there is this organization, the Global Alliance for the Future of Food, organized a discussion online in which a consultant presented the result of her work in trying to answer why is it that funders are not devoting more money to agroecology. And she reported that the following reasons were at the top of the reasons. One is that there is still this belief that agroecology doesn't have strong science, which is in alignment to what Anna said. And the second one is that they think there is this perception that agroecology leans too much to the left. So those were very critical situations that are still, I think, that are still in the thinking of many people, and that's something that needs to be overcome. But at the same time, things are going, I think, in the right directions. And I just mentioned that there is this whole work on the concept of regenerative agriculture. Now they are using the concept of regenerative food systems, and that's where a little bit more of the discussion has to be in place. And it is important to say, as my understanding, maybe Oliver can correct me if I'm wrong, but it was a moment in which the two approaches were kind of going in parallel direction until the two of them agreed to work based on the 13 principles presented by agroecology. So now there is a way of working together because we are facing the same problem. And it turns out that both agroecology and regenerative ag are talking about co-creation of knowledge in which they are opening to new ways of creating knowledge. And it turns out that FAO is also trying to introduce changes to the concept of SPI, which is Science Policy Interface, to Knowledge Policy Interface, because there are many evidences throughout the world that when we have policies based only on science, the number of failures is great. And one of the reasons research has shown is because they did not incorporate valid, solid, legitimate local knowledge, either from local people or from indigenous peoples. So this is a call for politicians, for policymakers and decision makers, that they have to have a broader, a holistic approach. And also, it's a call for us who are working on agroecology to not use agroecology only as for rhetoric, and not to use indigenous knowledge for folkloric reasons. There is solid science, and let me give you an example of it. And there is this concept from science, holobiont. The concept of holobiont moves us away from the concept of species and lets us think of the relationships that this particular individual or species has relationships with the surroundings, with other species, with other creatures, not only with other plants like the crop or weeds, but also with insects, with pathogens, with viruses. There is a holobiont. It has lots of interaction. It's already scientifically accepted. Well, it turns out that through the process of management in indigenous food systems, the architecture of the weeds, based on the concept of holobiont, explains why the labor that the farmers put on the field does not need the use of herbicides. It naturally goes the control of many things. And I don't know in your cases, but in my case, in the Yucatec Maya farmers, to us, the food system is the combination of many sources from which we get food. One is the milpa, but it's not the only one. It's a popular one, but it's not the only one. I also get food from the forest. I also get food from beekeeping. I also get food from my home garden. I also get food from other 2 or 3, 4 different. So the whole thing is my food system. Can you imagine how much work it takes for somebody, for a person, even if the children, which now are not willing to work in farming, how much work will take to maintain all this whole system around a family? It's a lot of work, unless I design a system that keeps itself in a good shape. It's a beautiful way to see how local and indigenous people's knowledge has put knowledge at work that can be validated via scientific means, and then we have a way then to create bridges, intercultural bridges, to co-create something that is needed. And now that, if I can keep talking, going back to the issue of knowledge and policy interface, there is also debate amongst the scientists. When it comes to do interdisciplinary work, think of a social scientist working together with a biologist. When they work alone, the epistemology of the work that they do is well known. It's kind of easy because each of us have different but concrete ways of creating knowledge. Both work under the scientific knowledge, but there are differences. One leans more toward qualitative analysis, another one leans more toward quantitative analysis, and so on. So put the two of them together in an interdisciplinary work that is much needed to understand the complexity of food systems, and in many cases it creates chaos, it creates problems, because we do not understand well enough the epistemology of the process. Well, just picture that if you add the indigenous knowledge system into this complexity. We need a much better system approach of understanding epistemological processes on how to construct knowledge. But there are alternatives. There are alternatives. The literature has some alternatives, and on site, on the fields, with the indigenous peoples, we have to have only the right lenses to see the processes there and start thinking about the co-creation of knowledge with different ways of learning.
Thank you very much, Francisco. So we really need to have this convergence of knowledge to be able to make sure that we're really looking at it from from a holistic perspective. And I'd like to talk to you, and I'd like to ask you a question around, well, we've heard about, well, agroecology, as we all know, is not just a science, it's also a practice, but it is also a social movement. It actually started as a social movement, which is trying to challenge, or it is challenging power structure and dynamics. And from where you're sitting, what challenges do you see in making sure that, as Francisco mentioned, we are going beyond rhetorics?
Yes, thank you. Well, we were just talking about, I gave this example of, there being more talk about regenerative agriculture because it's basically easier to, to digest, I guess, and to discuss because this layer of complexity and politics is a bit removed. But of course, what is also at the core of agroecology as a movement is the idea of food sovereignty, right? And that local communities, and I'm sure that you can talk more about that as well, they are not dependent on buyers, and they can indeed design their food system or their farming system as they want, right? They can conserve their own seeds and not being dependent on input suppliers, etc. And I think that is maybe not popular with the big agri-food companies, but I think it's very important. And one way to challenge, these structural inequalities is to build the collective power, the collective agency of local communities, for instance, through supporting collective action, right, and supporting farmers' collectives. And recently we have started up, for instance, a study in Western Kenya, also under the Low-Emission Food Systems Initiative, in which we're trying to see, we often talk about farmers having to adopt this or having to adopt that, right? Different kind of technologies. But we don't often talk so much about the abilities that farmers have to adopt. And I think that's very important. And we have this hypothesis that if you improve, or that collective action and having support from peers in a farmer group, a self-help group or a cooperation, doesn't really matter, that this could actually increase the self-efficacy of farmers, so their ability or that they believe they can do something, because that is, of course, where doing something starts, right? So going back to challenging structural inequalities, I think that could be one pathway or one avenue in which you can, support local communities in their collective action. So trying to understand what we can do to support the self-efficacy of these farmers, for instance, by providing training or to linking them to government, etc., or to local government, and also including them into these stakeholder processes at local level that are talking about how do we want this system to look, and what kind of innovations do we need. And I agree very much with what you just said, Francisco, that we have to not, when we talk about science, we shouldn't see science only as something which is produced by scientists such as myself, but it is, of course, really combining different kinds of knowledge, also local knowledge, to really understand the local conditions and local challenges, and then acting and strategizing, on basis of that.
Thanks very much. And I'd like us to go back to the issue around low-emission food systems. We've heard that there's a lot of benefits of agroecology, in terms of low emission than conventional agriculture. I just wanted to ask you, Natasha and Monica, I hope you're still with us. Joshua, Mutembe needed to go to leave the airport, and therefore he lost his internet connection. I wanted to ask you, Natasha and Monica, if indeed low emission, if agroecology brings a lot of benefits as a low emission approach towards food system, could this be a push factor to further support agroecology at, at a national level as a matter of national policy?
Yeah, I think agroecology for me is a kind of holistic way of looking at food production and using biodiversity as an ally and instead of as an enemy. And low emission for me is a kind of very narrow way of looking at the benefits of agroecology. Because of course there are lower emissions, especially if you use less inputs like fertilizers and pesticides. It is lower emissions because you're taking care of the soil better, so especially in non-tillage systems and agroforestry systems, you see that there are lower emissions and that there is even increased carbon sequestration. And as I said before, because land tends to be less degraded or not degraded because it's healthy soils, we also see that it reduces the risk of driving deforestation and further conversion. So in that sense, I think that if you see low emissions like that, it's very positive. But I also would like to stress the importance of other benefits of agroecology, like being more adapted to climate change because of the soils that are far more resilient, and because there is a variety of foods that are being produced in almost like ecosystem imitating circumstances. So I was sitting in a session with people from IPCC and IPBES, you should say, I learned there.
Yeah,
no, they say IPBES, but I always said IPBES. And they said we shouldn't, for agricultural production, we are not making a distinction between mitigation and adaptation in our assessments and indicators, because they come very much together. And actually I agree with that. So I think we should look in a more holistic way. And then your question is, should we use this for convincing governments? And my full reaction would be yes, but don't focus only on the low emission part, focus also on the climate adaptation part. And as I understand also from the negotiations, especially the southern countries are really stressing the importance of climate adaptation strategies. Also to put it into the national strategies, into unlocking climate funds. So I think from that perspective as well, so being a little bit more political, and I can be because we are a kind of activist organization, I would say let's be opportunist as well by stressing all the benefits that agroecology has, and by making sure that agroecology and the benefits and the indicators to monitor those benefits are both stretching mitigation, adaptation and food security. Because basically we are talking about the three major challenges for the next decade. And that's biodiversity, that's climate change, and that is equal access to food for all. And I think agroecology is the major direction for ticking all those boxes.
Thanks very much, Natasha. Monica, what is your take?
Yeah, thank you. Like Natasha said, like the colleague that asked the last question, I think it's very connected, because at the national level, we need to help governments to tackle multiple challenges at the same time, not only about the climate mitigation adaptation, but also biodiversity. So this holistic view is important to avoid focus only on trade-offs, but mainly on synergies, to not have policies that will help to reduce greenhouse emissions, but compromise biodiversity or food security and nutrition. And what the colleague asked, just to make a link, at national level, we have agriculture ministry taking care of big farmers, smallholders, family farmers, and the environment ministry taking more care about indigenous people, local communities, traditional knowledge. So the food systems is kind of a glue that could connect all of these dots, because as the other colleague just said also about the importance of interdisciplinary, how to break silos, because I think this is the real challenge. Regarding knowledge, regarding science, we have evolved a lot. In the last decades, during the H targets, we have many evidence about agroecological practice, but also other kind of practices that are sustainable, all the linkage between pollination and agricultural productivity, soil biodiversity and soil health, etc., etc. We still have a lot of gaps of knowledge, but we have built a lot of things that could help us to support governments on this transition of the food system, and also in having this interministerial approach dialogue, because it's very important to have the ministry aligned between them, because pollination, for example, is not only a problem of environment. Pollination is highly important for agriculture production. So how we can conserve and make sustainable use of pollination, of pollinators, of soil biodiversity, etc. So I think this is the linkage that national government needs to do, linked to economy, labor opportunity, like we also discussed today about job creations, opportunity to youth, because all this sustainable agriculture, doesn't matter the name that we give, regenerative agriculture, agroecology, agroforestry, syntropic agriculture, etc., is very labor intensive. We need knowledge, we need practices, which is different from the conventional agriculture, where we have a recipe that more or less fit everyone, by seeds, by fertilizers, by pesticides. Now it's different. All these approaches need knowledge. So this is linked to economy, how we build this labor opportunity, how we train people, because it's very knowledge intensive, and how we transform the subsidies to eliminate harmful subsidies to scale up positive incentives, and also for the social, how the national government link this to the social issues, food system security, nutrition, and finally to link to environment, how to protect biodiversity, how we can have resilient agricultural systems that will reverse land degradation, water scarcity, create resilience, and also ecosystem restoration. So yeah, those are some thoughts that I had during this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Monica. I mean, it's just thinking of the question posed to us by Joshua earlier. I think in the negotiations, I think that normally if you have, as already mentioned, you are here in COP, it's basically the Ministers of Agriculture. You go to CFS or in FAO, it's the Ministry of Agriculture. Here it's Ministry of Environment, etc. And sometimes we tend to forget that the Ministries of Socio-Economic Planning sometimes is already important, because they are the ones holding the pen in developing national development plans. And they are the ones in principle should be integrating all these different sectoral plans. Lest to forget Ministries of Finance and Budget, because ultimately, you know, you have a budget to roll it out. And we hardly talk about them. We hardly see them in negotiations such as this, because their conversations are happening in Davos amongst themselves on finance. So how do we bring them into these conversations? I think one part of the response to the question that Joshua mentioned is basically maybe non-state actors need to lobby prior to big events such as this, not only for the issues that they need to see addressed, but who should be sitting in those tables, right? Not only the ministers that we are usual targets, but you know, going beyond the usual ministers that we are looking at. So I think it's important to bring in them into the conversations. Let us stop here for the moment and flip the conversation again into the audience. Any questions or reactions that any one of you may have in what you have just heard, or anything you would want to add or highlight, or what you think is missing from the conversations that we're having today? Anyone? Yes, Lou. The microphone is here. Yeah. Thank you.
Just picking up on the point you're just making about why aren't we talking to finance ministers and things like that. We treat climate change, we treat biodiversity loss as an environmental problem. We don't treat it as an economic problem.
Correct.
But it is an economic problem, and these are medium-term economic issues. And until we start articulating it like that, as long as it's the Environment Ministry, which is, I'm sorry to say, but it's very often a punishment post in the government, right? If you get too important and you start to surpass the president, they make you the Environment Minister, and you're no longer Finance Minister. It happened in Kenya many years ago. But the idea that these things are environmental issues and not central to the medium-term well-being of the economic development of the country is a bit what's setting it aside. And so until we start translating this out of the environment, which is seen as sort of a luxury thing you take care of after you take care of livelihoods and things like that, and start treating this as something that's really an immediate threat and a medium-term threat to the economic development of the country, then I don't think we're going to start getting there. So we need to get out of this environment idea and into this economics. And this is where agroecology can really do it, because what does ecology do? Ecology and economics both have the same root, eco, right? Oikos, our house. It's Greek for our house, right? It's about understanding the connections and the links and seeing things as a system, not seeing things as individual. Agronomists see rice, wheat, maize. How do I make this better? What's the relationship between the soil and my plant? What's the relationship between the nutrients in my plant? What's the relationship between water in my plant? One by one. Economists, ecologists, systems thinkers really see the connections, and this is where agroecology is much more about the connections. It's about linking what farmers already know through traditional knowledge, through the practice. They're in the field day in and day out. They observe their system. They understand economics better than any of us. They understand risk better than any of us. They understand how their system is related to the economy and how markets affect them. So they see all these links. So getting back to this approach, this is where I think agroecology, with focusing on not just the components, but how the components relate to each other, is really key.
Indeed, thanks very much. Any quick reaction to what? Yes, please.
Yeah, I just want to sort of kind of build on that and what you were saying about ministers in the United Kingdom recently. One of the new environment ministers is Steve Barker. He was here for a couple of days, sort of talking about what we're doing, but he'd just been shifted from another ministry, and it was talked about as a demotion in all the press everywhere. That the environment, it doesn't get more important, but it was seen as a massive demotion for him, destroying his ambitions in government. So it happened in the UK 2 weeks ago. But I was just going to say, adding to that, I also think there is the need to keep bringing the social part into the narrative, and we're working on social justice and what it really means, from access to food down to landowners, etc. But the social part, really, people get that because it affects them. And that in the economic case is so important. And one thing, I don't know if you were aware, the One Health Alliance was sort of WHO launched that yesterday, and they announced that UNEP had got on board, FAO's already part of it, and they framed it in the economic opportunities of taking a One Health approach. When they talked about the cost of delivering One Health globally was 4.3 billion or trillion a year, but the benefit was 40 trillion a year, and they talked about it completely in financial sense, and that, I think, is the right way of doing this.
Thank you for bringing that up. Any other points here? Anybody from this group who wants to react to any of what you have just heard? Anne?
Well, I had a comment on more what Natasha was saying earlier about low-emission food systems, and I just wanted to, clarify that I think that, even when low-emission food systems, we indeed, focus, of course, on mitigation, but the moment that you work with smallholder farmers, you cannot indeed, as you were also saying, detach low-emission development from adaptation. First of all, because if it's not contributing to adaptation and resilience at the same time, which smallholder farmer will be even interested to do so? I mean, you cannot justify it, right? But also because often there are a lot of synergies between low-emission development and adaptation, right? So that they're not necessarily distinct. So it is indeed really about looking for these synergies. But then, the idea that southern countries are not interested in low-emission food systems, I don't think that's entirely true, because they do have certain commitments, right? Also on reducing emissions in their NDCs. So on a national level, there is also interest in, and maybe that is opposed or imposed, but there is definitely interest in also trying to identify opportunities for reducing emissions in food systems. So, that is where we sit with this initiative, to really identify those opportunities that also work for farmers, and not just for some farmers, but actually for farmers in all their diversity, and to really ensure that we don't have undesirable effects of that, neither on social relations or social factors, but also not on the environment, of course.
Yeah, I like to comment because also, Joshua, you were mentioning about the negotiations here. And we are following the negotiations. And we were actually quite optimistic in the beginning, especially with the United Arab Emirates Declaration. And yesterday we learned that already 150 countries have signed it. So there are commitments, and indeed individual countries are willing to look at food system approaches. And I'm really seeing that as a kind of optimistic development in which that can also accelerate agroecology, in, for instance, the NDCs and the national adaptation plans. Where we see the negotiations now going wrong, I think, is that food systems need to be adopted, for instance, in the global stocktake. But there are so many other points on the agenda that this one it seems to fall off. And we have been waiting the whole day for the text, so when we are ready here, we will see if the text dropped. Yes. It drops, okay.
It dropped?
It is in. Okay, well, that's great news.
They said it's paragraph 71. It says resilient food system. So it dropped around 5:10 this afternoon. So,
Well,
All right.
so after this meeting, we can all go and celebrate.
well, let's see.
That's really
Let's see.
They will
There's
be
also-
listening to this.
Yeah, there's also something about land use. So there's something around agriculture, but not. So that's the latest so far.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, let's
So
check
we'll
on
keep
that.
monitoring and fingers crossed.
Yeah. But what I mean to say is that it's part of a bigger negotiation, and we can see it from the side of negative, because it's a lost opportunity. But on the other hand, we are here now. We have a food pavilion. There's been so much momentum, so much good energy about food being part of the climate negotiations. And I also feel like, indeed, maybe we don't get the things here that we were hoping for, but we can use this also as a start to talk to our governments and to convince them and to bring in the climate people and to bring in the financial people. And that's also a kind of comment. WWF is part of in the food pavilion, so I've been following a lot of food events. And we were saying as well, we are preaching here to the choir, because everyone in that pavilion knows what we have to do. So maybe our job for this year, towards the COP of next year, is to talk to people from the other pavilions and to liaise with people in our governments and with other organizations, other NGOs, to make them also part of our struggle.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Well, you know, everyone is talking about COP30 in Brazil, in Belém.
Yeah.
But we tend to forget as well that, you know, the road through Brazil from Dubai passes through Baku. So we need to find out. We need to be very, very, you know, vigilant as well what happens in Baku, lest, you know, agenda could be derailed at some point. Any other feedback? Any other points? Monica, would you like to bring in other perspectives there from where you're sitting from biodiversity perspective? How does that link into the climate conversations with agroecology as a centerpiece? Although you've already mentioned about the importance of linking all these various sectors and perspectives together.
Yeah, I think the role of agroecology in other innovative practices is beyond the climate issue. We really need to see as a holistic solution for many problems. So I think we can list here many contributions for agroecology, for climate adaptation, for climate mitigation. But if we look beyond, we will see that we really need to shift the paradigm of food production. So, for instance, all this connection between the different ministry responsibility that we already discussed. No, and yeah, so I think we really need to open this conversation. What is discussed on the climate change COP, but also on the biodiversity COP, also under the UNCCD COP. We really need this common approach, common discussion to avoid the trade-offs. Not easy task, but I think I have the impression that we have started. Thank you.
I'd like to turn over to Anne and maybe Francisco here in terms of how can we bring in the resilience and equity piece from all these conversations from where you're sitting?
Well, one thing that I've recently been working on, and that is again more specifically on building women's resilience, is to really, or to first of all look at different kinds of resilience and pathways in resilience. And then I'm not talking about the system, but about individual resilience of people, the ability to maintain or improve their livelihoods in the face of climate change. And we have been working on trying to identify what needs to happen or what factors weigh in if you would want people to move from more absorptive resilience pathways, so pathways in which, in the face of, for instance, a climatic crisis, they are able to cope and to continue, but maybe experience a gradual decline over time if these events become more common, to more of an adaptive resilience pathway, or even at some point maybe a transformative resilience pathway. And the transformative resilience pathway, you cannot do alone basically, but that requires action probably at a collective, for instance on a community or even larger level. So we're trying to see which what is important and what do women, but also men, need to move from these different kinds of pathways, and at least away from, pathways that are declining or even maybe at some point ending completely, right?
Thank you. Francisco.
Thank you. The way we have a take on the concept of resilience is connecting resilience with adaptation and evolution. And let me elaborate a little bit on this. It will be unfair and unjust and incorrect to consider that indigenous food systems are static. There is always a continuous process of adaptation and evolution. The milpas or any other human cultivation, for instance, best examples today are not the same as they were 50 years ago. There is a process of adaptation and evolution, and which is based on the concept of resilience. And we understand resilience from an ecological perspective, in which every time there is a problem that breaks the system, if the system rebounds and completes against the whole other processes, but sets conditions to move on, that's what we understand by resilience. So, and in this case, it is also for many indigenous cultures, one of the systems of food production rests on burning / burning. And that system is not well received or approved and actually banned by legislation in many places, including my own country. Well, it turns out that research shows that when the / burning is well carried out, there is a net return of carbon into the biomass that follows. But what happens is that when the process of transmitting knowledge from one generation to the next breaks down, the knowledge behind a sustainable / burn system breaks down. And yes, there are positive emissions now to the atmosphere because of slash and burn. But the reason is not the system itself, it's because a part of the system broke down, the correct transmission and evolution of knowledge. That's what happened. And that's where the intercultural approach to education, at least in indigenous areas, is quite important.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Francisco. And I'll give the floor to you, Natasha. Any other take on this one?
No, I
parting
like your
message,
comment, and you said an intercultural approach, and I was also thinking an intergenerational approach.
Okay, of course.
Yeah, And I think it's a really important insight that resilience needs also evolution, and especially in light of climate change, we don't know exactly what is going to happen. We can project things, but it means that we have to co-create knowledge continuously.
Indeed.
And factoring also in well, the circumstances in which we are doing that, so also the physical. And I think that's, we can learn a lot about the web of nature in natural circumstances. And I think that could also be added to the knowledge that we need, is to have more knowledge about how nature works and how the web of things and interconnectedness that you spoke before, it can help us also to secure food availability over generations.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And we have 3 minutes left. I just wanted to ask if anyone from the audience would like to share their key takeaway from the conversation that we're having today. Anyone? What are you bringing with you as you wrap up, pack your bags, and go back to your hotels and take your flight tomorrow morning? What are you taking home? Anyone? Going once? Going twice?
Gresha wants to talk.
Yep.
Thank you so much for the discussion. That was really enlightening. And as Francisco has said, the concept of how we see regeneration in the indigenous communities is often sidelined. And as Francisco has pointed out, and also reflecting on the presentations, we often see reforestation as the solutions to many of the interventions talking about sequestering carbon. But often the loose term of what a degraded land means to in the definition of restoration has put many of our systems on vulnerability. Just for example, like the fallows that I come from the indigenous communities of the Khasi, the Jaintia community, and where shifting cultivation as an integral part of our system. When we talked about the payment for ecosystem services or the other aspect of the program designing the restoration, it often missed out the intricacy of the knowledge that is associated with the supported or assisted regeneration that we talked. And I think this platform is also an opportunity. What I would take away is the requirement of the interculturality in the knowledge system, and this would start with the education system in itself, because we have been filled in with the education system to think in only one side. But I think that intercultural approach is what I would be taking, and also how we can as youth, push on that opportunity to campaign for how this agroecology can be a mainstream in our systems and also in part of the policies as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Indeed, inherently integrated approaches like agroecology is able to unlock that multiple benefits that we all could see, and that we could really need to see and use agroecology as a pathway that will help us really achieve our climate, biodiversity, land, nutrition targets all at the same time. And we should all basically treat it as one holistic whole rather than, some of individual parts. With that, thank you very much for staying with us, COP28 survivors, our speakers with us who joined. Lou, thanks very much for framing. Monica, thanks for joining us live from your place in Canada. Have a safe journey, enjoy everyone, and just want to remind you that, the challenge and the fight doesn't stop here. When you all go back, let's continue to connect and go and talk to your negotiators. Make sure that, from Baku to Belém, we'll see food systems not only in language, but also in action. Thanks very much. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.
To this official COP28 side event on the importance of the linkage between health, food, and climate action. We, the Nordic Council of Ministers, we are co-hosting this event together with Finland and the World Health Organization. It is my pleasure to give a few opening remarks before we delve into the program. Today's event makes the case for including food systems and health in future climate action. This is the essence of our program today, as it was of yesterday's Food System Day at COP28. The message bears repeating. We know that healthy diets and good nutrition promote better health. This is a worthy goal in itself, but we also have research showing that healthy diets are also better for the planet. So it is a win-win, I would say. I hope you agree with me. Our food systems are in real need for a makeover. We must make healthy and sustainable food accessible for all. And in order to do this, we must look at the full supply chain, from production to consumption, and we must do this within the planetary boundaries. There are no pathways to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees that do not include changes to our food systems. We can never phase out food like we will do it with fossil fuels such as oil and coal, because food is essential to life itself. We know that this transition takes more than pointing to the numbers. What enabling factors can we use to promote change? What are the levers? Best practices. I mean, we need such success stories that can inspire us all. So today, we will hear from political leaders, from the policy makers and the experts on what we need to do to push ahead. Because we need to act, and we need to build bridges across climate, food, and health communities. And now I have the honor to present Dr. Tedros, Director General of the World Health Organization, who will be greeting us with a video message. Please enjoy.
Your Excellency, Minister Yasmin Fuad, Your Excellency, Minister Kai Mikanen, Secretary General Karen Ellman, Excellencies, dear colleagues and friends, our food systems are harming the health of people and planet. Food systems contribute to over 30% of greenhouse gas emissions and account for almost 1/3 of the global burden of disease. Transforming food systems is therefore essential by shifting towards healthier, diversified, and more plant-based diets. If food systems delivered healthy diets for all, we could save 8 million lives per year. Nordic countries have been trailblazers for many policy breakthroughs, including for linking climate and nutrition. Thank you for your leadership in this area and for organizing this discussion to share experiences and lessons learned. WHO is committed to supporting countries to develop and implement policies to improve diets and fight climate change. Last year, under the leadership of the Egyptian COP27 presidency, WHO and our partners launched ICAN, the Initiative on Climate Action and Nutrition. The ICAN baseline report currently shows low integration of climate and nutrition in policies, in funding mechanisms, and particularly in the private sector. I'm therefore very pleased that over 130 countries have signed the COP28 UAE Declaration on Climate and Health. Together, we can protect and promote the health of both people and planet. I thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tedros.
Your Excellency, Minister Yasmin Fuad,
That's Dr. Tedros mentioning all the people who are supposed to sit up here. So instead of making him say that again, I will do it. But let me start just saying thank you, Dr. Tedros, because it is an important message to all of us. Our food systems are harming our health and planet. That's what he's saying. And he's telling us that 8 million lives could be saved every year if everyone had access to healthy diets. Important messages. So, the panel that Dr. Tedros is talking about. Let me find this microphone and get ready to introduce it. First, we have one participating online, and that's Claire Bury, Deputy Director General for Food Sustainability, DG Sante, European Commission. So she's joining us online. And then, please join me up here, Dr. Francesco Branca, Director, Department of Nutrition and Food Safety, World Health Organization. Welcome to you. Second one up here is Mrs. Shakuntala Tilstad. You are the Director of CGR and also a World Food Prize winner. Thank you very much for being here in the panel. And then we have Lana Wigenand, Youth Representative from the Coalition of Action on Healthy Diets from Sustainable Food Systems for Children and All. And then there's still room up here, and that's because we are also going to welcome the Finnish Minister for Climate and Environment. But he's actually in a meeting right now, so hopefully he's doing good there, no doubt about that, but hopefully he will be joining us. So right now, I will just stay with the wonderful team we have here and start by introducing our first speaker who's joining us online, and it's Mrs. Claire Bury, Deputy Director General for Food Sustainability, as I said, DG Sante in the European Commission. Welcome, Mrs. Bury. Can you hear us in Brussels?
Yes, I can hear you. I can hear you loud and clear, Karen. Thank you very much.
Much for joining us. Mrs. Bury, the European Union adopted in December 2019 the Green Deal. And how does it promote the transition of food systems and the adoption of healthy diets within the health, food and climate nexus? And could you also maybe, when you speak now, get the word, please share how the EU food industry is engaged in this process. Over to you, Claire.
Okay, thank you very much, Karen, and thanks so much to the organisers for inviting the Commission to be present and for allowing us to do it online as well. So the Nordic Council of Ministers, to Finland and to the WHO, we really thank you for organising this event. So you asked me about the Green Deal, what it does, how it puts together food systems and healthy diets, and what have we done with industry. So since it was adopted, the European Green Deal at the end of 2019 has put sustainability very much at the heart of the EU agenda, and it sets out a strategy to improve people's health and quality of life within the planetary boundaries, and also I think tries to bring together this nexus that you very clearly spoke about, which is healthy diets means a healthier planet, and how does that reinforce itself. So we have something called the Farm to Fork strategy, which is the part of the Green Deal which deals with the agri-food chain and the biodiversity strategy. And these are really the central elements for trying to transform our food systems, make it more sustainable and resilient. A key part of the Farm to Fork strategy is recognizing that we need an increased part of plant-based foods in our diets to ensure that our consumption is in line with nutritional recommendations, but also reducing environmental impacts and reducing life-threatening diseases. And this shift requires the involvement of a wide range of actors. And I have to say that work such as that, which happens under the Nordic nutrition recommendations, is a very, very valuable contribution to this process. But what have we been doing in Europe in terms of engaging industry? We have something which was adopted in 2021, which is called the EU Code of Conduct on Responsible Food and Business and Marketing Practices, which was specifically designed to bring in industry, civil society, international organizations and stakeholders as well, and facilitated by the Commission. And it covers all fields of sustainability. So it's a voluntary initiative which gathers associations and asks them to make concrete commitments to turn EU food systems into sustainable food systems. So now we already have 140 signatories, associations, by and large big companies, and we're hoping to get smaller companies in as well. One of the objectives of the code is to promote healthy and balanced and sustainable diets. So commitments would cover, for example, areas like product reformulation, reducing sugars, salt, saturated fats, increasing fiber-rich grains, nuts and seeds, and micronutrients, very much at the heart of what you've been doing in the Nordic countries as well. Improving consumer information, using consumer-facing nutritional information, improving labeling, education, promoting food education through communication to consumers, but also partnering with schools and educators and families. And hopefully by connecting the dots between this climate action and nutrition, we can make sure that the healthy diets really encourage, promote, move us towards more sustainable food systems. And I think also this is really an example of what we call here the One Health approach, and which we're very much promoting between what happens with people's health, human health, and environmental health. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Bury. Thank you very much. In addition to what you've said about, well, in general, healthy and sustainable diets, reducing food waste is also key for sustainable food consumption. How is the EU working to reduce food waste also as part of a sustainable consumption and climate agenda? Could you say something about that, please?
Oh. Obviously, certainly in Europe, food waste. I know in other parts of the world, it's food loss that's the problem. Sorry, have you got an echo in the room? That sounds like... No? Ah. Okay, so I'll carry on, but it's... There wasn't an echo on the previous question, but there is now.
You can just carry on because we hear you.
Okay, well, you can hear, okay. So we have in Europe, I'm afraid to say, 58 million tons of food waste every year. We are clearly committed to the SDG target 12.3 to halve per capita food waste at the retail and consumer level by 2030, and to reduce food losses along the food production supply chains. So to accelerate our progress towards this goal, earlier this year in the summer, the Commission adopted a proposal to put in place legally binding food waste reduction targets for our member states by 2030. We proposed that they reduce food waste by 10% in processing and manufacturing and by 30% at retail and consumption level. Now, obviously, this is at this stage not as much as the 50%, but this is intended as a first step, and by 2027 we will assess progress and then hopefully be able to upgrade and go towards the 50% by 2030. So we want really more ambitious actions amongst our member states. We want them to do it in a systemic way, all working together to reduce food loss, because if we can manage this, it's really a triple win, because we save food for human consumption, we lower the environmental impact of food production, and last, but by no means least, we help businesses and consumers to save money. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Bury. Very clear messages, and all the best for the very important work. Legally binding is somehow working. So I hope that you will be able, Mrs. Bury, to stay with us just a bit longer, because there might be few questions, and we never know if they are addressed to you. So please, if it's possible, stay with us. Thank you. And now it's my pleasure to introduce the next speaker next to me. You're not only a global leader and an expert on nutrition, but you're also co-hosting this event. So Dr. Francesco Branca, Director of Nutrition and Food Safety with WHO. Can you highlight a number of public policies and strategies that WHO is promoting that can ensure availability and affordability of healthy and sustainable diets for all and everywhere? large question. Over to you.
Yeah, but first of all, allow me to thank the Nordic Council of Ministers and really echo what my Director General said about the fantastic partnership and above all for the leadership that you are showing. We need that political leadership in the world for food system transformation. Now, your question is complex, but you already in your introduction gave a hint of what the answer should be, and that is that food and nutrition policies have to have health and sustainability as their objectives. So we need to combine efficient production with affordable nutrition, inclusive livelihoods, and environmental sustainability. So we need action on the supply side, public investment, infrastructure, research, market support. And if you think, for example, of the massive investment which is done in support of food and agriculture, this is about $630 billion every year on average. I mean, this is 2013, 2018 calculation. So, changing and repurposing those agricultural subsidies definitely is going to be an important driver of that transformation. WHO is focused on the policies that shape food environments to make healthy food and drinks more available, affordable, and desirable. So we have, let's say, 5 elements that we would like to really call the attention to. First is the design of the actual products. And I'm pleased that there's a lot of alignment with what WHO is saying and what the Farm to Fork strategy of the EU is also saying. So on the product design, most countries have been able to phase out an unhealthy ingredient, which is partially hydrogenated vegetable oils. We've almost achieved the target of eliminating it from the food supply. Salt can be reduced in most products, and then vitamins and minerals can be added to staple food during processing when needed. Second area is the price of food products. WHO recommends to tax sugar-sweetened beverages and foods that are not supportive of healthy diets and subsidize foods that are supportive. Third is the desirability of products. Marketing foods and beverages directly to children of all ages should be restricted through mandatory policies covering the whole spectrum of marketing techniques, the power of digital marketing. We have to deal with that. Fourth is the actual availability of products. The public sector can use the power of public food procurement to shape the demand for healthy food and benefit school children, and public employees, they use the canteens and public services. But an important component will be the social support scheme. So what is offered and that facilitates the purchase of foods that are in line with dietary guidelines. So food aid should be part of that, in the part of the world where this is needed. And fifth is informing people through education campaign and clear communication, the point of choice, through nutrition labeling that everybody sees and understands. We have seen how important the global processes are, so the UN Food Systems Summit, and now what is being discussed at COP, because at the moment, the food transformation pathways talk about nutrition-sensitive agriculture, awareness raising, food safety, but they don't talk about affordability and accessibility of food of high and unhealthy fats, sugar, and salt. So there's a lot we have to do to reshape those policies.
Well, thank you so much. And those 5 overall advice and targets, fully supported from us, definitely. And then, so to say, the production and consumption of meat and dairy. We didn't talk that much or hear you that much about that. And that's, I don't know if I can use the phrase, it's a hot potato when we discuss this in many countries. And a very wide, different opinions on this one. So some people could say that meat and dairy are the solution to climate change. But we also heard now Dr. Tedros in his opening remarks actually saying that we need a shift towards more plant-based diets. So maybe I would be very curious to hear you elaborate a little bit on where does WHO stand on this theme.
No, thank you. It's an important question, and I know there's been a lot of debate on this in these days, and still is, and it's not going to fade out because it's an important point. But if you look at the burden of disease, and if you look at the reasons why we have unhealthy diets, actually, diets are unhealthy because we have excess salt, sugars, saturated fat. We also have a little bit of excess red meat consumption, but largely diets are unhealthy because of insufficient consumption of whole grain cereals, legumes, fruit and vegetables. So that's why we're saying, that a shift towards more plant-based diets would benefit, everybody, and would reduce the impact of the environment. Of course, it depends also on production system, use of water. There are complexities there, but the shift towards plant diet is where we have to go. Now, animal source food, including moderate amount of red meat, contribute to healthy diets, particularly in the first year of life. However, we have to know that excess consumption is responsible for excess deaths, particularly cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and certain cancers. So we have an equity issue. So we have in upper middle income countries consumption levels that are high, and then in those countries a small consumption would actually be beneficial to health. We calculated that only a 14% reduction. 14% is not a big amount. Would save 65,000 lives every year. There are countries where the average consumption is 713 grams per week. And any health recommendation say that the maximum, really, even the most generous recommendation should not exceed 500 grams. So you see, an average consumption at population level is really exceeding what is the best possible recommendation in health. But then, this would also benefit, of course, greenhouse gas emissions, the use of antibiotics that are used in intensive livestock farming. At the same time, low-income countries, a moderate increase in consumption would be beneficial to children's growth and development as long as it reaches the individuals who need it, and not the segments of the population who are adopting high-income countries' dietary patterns, and therefore would actually be harmed by having increased consumption. So, again, it's a justice and distribution issue.
But thank you very much for elaborating on that one. That's very important. Now I will turn to you, Shakuntala Tilsted. You're the Director, Nutrition, Health and Food Security Impact Area Platform at CGAR. And also, as I mentioned, a World Food Prize winner back in 2029. Thank you so much for joining us here. The UAE declaration have acknowledged the linkage between sustainable agriculture, resilient food systems, and climate action. So I would very much like to hear you elaborate on what the opportunities are and how we move forward to reach the SDGs by 2030. Please.
Thank you so much for having me here. And the UAE declaration was really, for us working in food systems, a milestone. We didn't think that we would reach so far so quickly, but here we are. But here we are today. So I'd like to make 3 points, and the first one is diversity. We must acknowledge that there is not just one food system, but many food systems. And these are diverse. They must be people-centric, taking into consideration different parts of the population, women, men, and young children, and they must be context-specific. Unfortunately, all these food systems are threatened by climate change and must adapt and transform to being more resilient food systems. One crucial link between modern food systems and traditional food systems and how we transform and facilitate this transformation must be that without compromising the one for the other. Instead of the one displacing the other, we must ensure that they are complementary, building on the strengths the opportunities and the capacity presented in these systems to transform towards resilient food systems that nourish all people and our planet without not leaving no one behind. The second point I'd like to raise is on innovations. So we must build transformative innovations at systems level, taking into consideration people, culture, and geography. And we must therefore invest in these innovations and ensure that they are both adopted but also adapted to facilitate positive change. One such example I can give is the adoption of agroecology approaches and traditional knowledge. By combining stories and poetry, traditional knowledge and practices with modern-day science and data, we can catalyze change towards nutritious, diverse, sustainable, and healthy diets for all, leaving no one behind. I'd be at lack if I do not include my own area of research, which is on aquatic food systems. As the pressure for terrestrial food systems continue to rise, we must transition and explore other opportunities, including aquatic food systems. Studies have shown that many low-trophic, high-mass aquatic foods, such as seaweed, mollusks, and pelagic small fish, are nutrient-dense and have carbon footprints that are lower or comparable to those of chicken. By investing and managing aquatic food systems sustainably, we can ensure that 3 billion people are nourished, livelihoods of 800 million people are sustained, half of which are women, and that these livelihoods are protected, and that also the health of the planet is sustained by including aquatic food systems. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, because I was thinking here to start by asking you, well, how do we ensure that we leave no one behind? But I really think you kind of painted the whole picture already. But if you have anything to add, please feel free. If there's any more you want to talk about when we have this transition to healthy and sustainable diets. I mean, are we forgetting to think about something? Would you like to add anything? If you don't, I fully understand, because you gave a broad picture. But of course, I can give you the second round.
Yeah. But leaving no one behind is extremely important as we move towards sustainable food systems and as we move towards ensuring that all population groups are well nourished. Culture, stories, and traditional knowledge are important. And we are at the stage, and we are, I think, as a people, smart enough to include new technologies, new data with that of culture and tradition. We haven't yet done so. So we must move forward with that and making sure that they are not lost, but they together form a much greater base on which we can build.
But thank you very much. The whole message about people, culture, and geography, that's very important. Thank you very much for now, Shakuntala Tilsted. And now I would like to turn to you, Lana. Sorry, I probably didn't pronounce it right. Could you help me?
Lana Weidgenant.
Weidgenant. Lana Weidgenant. I'm so happy that you're here on board in this panel, because your efforts and your dedication towards promoting healthy and sustainable diets, also here in Dubai, are quite impressive. And you have said before that healthy, sustainable diets were the top youth priority leading up to the UN Food Systems Summit. So now, could you tell us just more about this youth passion and engagement? We would love to hear that.
Of course. So to set the scene a little bit more with the UN Food Systems Summit that has already been mentioned, there were 5 action tracks or sort of key focus areas, and the shift to sustainable consumption and in that dietary patterns was one of those 5 key areas in which we also had youth engagement, not only of myself as personally having served as the youth vice chair there, but also a number of other young people that were in the action track, in the leadership team, and actually took it upon themselves to go and write a youth paper demanding political action on healthy, sustainable diets that came out the day of the UN Food Systems Summit. So the passion was already there from the beginning, and we also had this initiative come out of the UN Food Systems Summit, now called Act for Food. At the time it started as a global youth pledge about food systems and with actions for change. And there we really saw young people voting around the world on our priorities and also writing and supporting this pledge in which healthy, sustainable diets were one of the key areas that were brought forward. We did have this key moment in the lead up to the UN Food Systems Summit. There was youth engagement in the UN Food Systems pre-summit, which was a large moment in Rome in the process where we had the expectation that a coalition on healthy diets, what is now called the Coalition of Action for Healthy Diets from Sustainable Food Systems, was going to be launched. And for a moment there, it looked like maybe it wouldn't be launched at all when we didn't see it in Rome. And there we really saw how young people know that this cannot be overlooked, because we came together to say this is not acceptable, that we absolutely cannot leave out healthy diets when we move forward with action in different areas. And luckily, we're not the only ones who felt that way, and we did see a coalition that is now moving forward with member states, with civil society, academic institutions, and continuing that work past the summit that took place in 2021. So the reason that we care about this as young people, we know that food systems are non-negotiable when it comes to successful climate action. Food systems are responsible for 1/3 of global greenhouse gas emissions, and we simply cannot afford to not address food systems in our work to fight the climate crisis. And healthy, sustainable consumption is a key aspect of that food systems transformation that needs to take place, that young people are emphasizing around the world, that we are working on ourselves. And so if I can ask a question for the panel as well. One of the aspects I've heard a lot today is, including from WHO, the Director General, and also Francesco here from the European Commission, and from Finland's and the Nordic nutrition recommendations from the Nordic countries, is shifting to more predominantly plant-based diets, shifting in that direction, and also looking at meat and dairy consumption. Francesco mentioned a little bit more. I would be interested in how you're involving leading stakeholders, such as youth and from civil society, in that process.
Well, thank you very much for popping questions back to the panel. Before I give them, could I just, well, I can, because that's what I'm supposed to do, but I'd like to just give you just a short follow-up, because I would like to hear you just say just a bit more about the Healthy Diets from Sustainable Food Systems Coalition, and what needs to be included in our Healthy Diets approach for successful food systems transformation. If you could maybe say a bit more about that, and then we will turn to the rest of the panel. And by the way, I think our minister is on his way as well, so we'll repeat the questions. But please, over to you, Lana.
Okay, well, you have a little bit of a heads up and some thinking time then. But in terms of the Coalition of Action on Healthy Diets, this is how we are moving forward on this key area from the Food Systems Summit, and making sure that we bring forward that work. Francesco was talking about some of the policy areas that we can do this on, so that includes national food-based dietary guidelines, looking at food in the nationally determined contributions or the country's climate commitments as well. And one of my calls to action in a space like this in COP28 is that we are seeing more of a push for food to be in the national climate plans, especially a food systems approach in NDCs, national adaptation plans, other national climate plans. But we need to make sure that when we call for that food systems approach, that consumption is part of that, and that diets are as well, because while we are seeing more possibility in more countries starting to cover food systems and agriculture finally in their national climate plans, consumption and diets are still far behind in being covered in those spaces. So if we can continue to push that forward, as it is a key aspect of the food systems transformation that we need. So ultimately, to wrap up, member states need to act on the dietary transition. I also want to thank the Nordic Council of Ministers, Finland, and the Nordic countries, which are really leading the way here, setting an amazing example in terms of incorporating this into dietary guidelines and recommendations that we can look at from other countries and other regions. And it's ultimately not just about food production, but about a shift as well. You've transmitted this ask in the UN Food Systems Summit and since then, and we hope that more people will look to this example, including in the national context.
Thank you very much, Lana. Now you popped a question here back to the panel, mainly focusing on the plant-based diet, but maybe we should also, before turning back to the rest of the panel, maybe also look over the audience and give you the possibility now to address this wonderful panel, and don't forget that we also have participation online. So please, Claire Burry, you're still with us. Thank you for being that. I can see there's a gentleman in the first row. Could you please state your name and then your question? Thank you.
My name is Augustine. I am the co-founder of the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance. And this topic is great for us. We think this kind of session is very, very important. I don't have a question, but I have some comments. I'd like to tell you my story. I'm a village boy. I was born in a village in the northwestern part of Cameroon. In this village, when we ever were hungry as young people, we look up to our mothers and our grandmothers. Whenever we saw our grandmother, we knew there would be food. My grandmother would go behind the house, harvest vegetables, cook for us, and we have it. We never had the luxury of eating meat. Our source of proteins were insects, and probably once in a while during Christmas or when there is celebration, you can have a taste of meat. We thought we were suffering, but now I realize that it was not suffering. A couple of years ago, when I went back to my own village, and I told them that don't look at me, my size, and admire me. I'm suffering. Because our ways of life are actually healthy. People work on their farms, they eat more vegetables, they don't put a lot of oil in their food, and most of the time the food is not with much salt. And they turned at me and said, give us the opportunity to eat the good food that you are eating before we also discover whether it is bad. Today, if you go back to that village, my grandmother cannot afford that food again because the lands are dry or they are flooded. My grandmother cannot have the luxury of choosing which vegetable to cook for her grandchildren because there are floods or droughts. Ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, we are talking about food systems and climate change. In these negotiations, adaptation to climate change is not taking the central stage the way it should have been taken. African countries are spending their budgets for adaptation more than they are doing for healthcare. They are forced to adapt. Can we just start looking at these things? That doubling, more than doubling of adaptation finance is what we should be putting on the table to help my grandmother grow her crops, grow the food that she needs to feed us and her grandchildren. We should not stop at this. We should go beyond this and do adaptation and provide means for adaptation finance in the continent. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment. I see a raised hand here and also there. Yes. Oh, you got the microphone first. Okay. Yes. And then it's back over
Thank
to you.
you very much. Thank you very much.
I think we will have, yes, these 3 questions total and then turn to the panel. Please.
I'm Pamphile Wakonduchizamu from Rwanda. And my question is just supposed to be done by the one who represented the World Health Organization as well. In my country, we have a proverb, just I have to translate it. We say that the hospitals don't give the health, they just repair the broken health. And we are becoming what we eat. For instance, if we eat well, we are becoming well or in the healthy. So I would like to ask what kind of strategy enforcement for our least developed countries, where we found that hospitals are waiting for illnesses and patients, but not focus on the way to trigger the education, information, communication to the communities so that they can involve in the environmental health, in the sustainable way of preventing those diseases, in a way of just producing in a nutritional sensitive way and protecting the climate and environment as well. I would suggest if there is any political way of enforcing the strategies in our countries so that they may just involve the community behavior change on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And then for the last question, second row.
Thank you very much, Karen. So my question is for anyone who wants to pick it up in the panel. I see the thing of healthy diets when it comes to consumers from 2 different perspectives. One is consumers that they can afford to have a healthy diet because they have all the income, and right now probably they don't have a healthy diet because they have over-consuming meat. And consumers that cannot afford because of income reasons, because they don't have the income to afford a healthy diet. And if we see the affordability index for healthy diets, we see that it's worsening when it comes to low-income countries. For the first part, I think we have a lot of tools, from choice editing to regulations to pricing to everything. What about the other consumers, the ones that they don't have actually the option, they can't afford the healthy diet because they don't have the income to do this? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stefanos. And unfortunately, we cannot run another round, so I think it's important to go on and pass these questions and comments to the panel. Could I start with you, Dr. Branca?
Sure. On the question that Lana asked, who are the stakeholders there? We work with mainly public stakeholders, and these are, of course, government, but also not just national governments, but government at local level. They have a very powerful role to play. I'm thinking about cities, and we have interesting experiences such as the one of the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact. They've actually been able to change the supply and transform the food system, make plant-based diets much more available, and actually appreciated by the students because to avoid waste. But also public health agencies, and I really would like to give the example of in Australia of Victoria Health, where they have even used innovation and, for example, used the resources of migrant people to set up food hubs and make exactly the foods, particularly plant food, much more available and affordable in response to what Stefano is also saying. Of course, the private sector, civil society organizations, I think it's an important player there is the food banks. Food banks, need to be designed in a way that we can distribute plant food. It's a bit more difficult because of the source of the food, but also the cold chain. We probably need to do more with the producers and particularly the distributors. I think the supermarket chain a very important role to play. On Stefano's point, the affordability of a healthy diet, absolutely. In fact, that's I think the critical point. And this is not about food prices. You know, food prices cannot be brought down because we don't want also to penalize the producers there. It's about, to me, it's a social protection issue. It's about also availability in poor neighborhoods. Sometimes it's not just the price, but the availability. There have been interesting schemes in support, for example, of local shops in poor neighborhoods that are supported to provide healthy diet, encouraged to provide healthy diet. And then, you know, all the social protection schemes should have provisions to support the purchase of healthy food and not the purchase of unhealthy food, which unfortunately sometimes is the case.
Thank you very much. I will turn to you, Ms. Burry, because I think the questions on the whole business sector could also be very interesting to hear your reflections on the questions coming from Lana. So I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'd like first, if I may, to pick up on the point that was made by the gentleman, his story, the gentleman from the Pan-African Alliance. And the punchline of that was about transition funding and the need for that. And of course, that's something that in the EU we are very much believe in, both in the lesser developed countries, but I think also within the more developed countries, we need to make sure that where there is funding which goes to the food production system, then it really must be channeled now much more into a sustainable food system. So we really need to change the incentives to the way that food production works and incentivize and fund the right kind of change there. On Lana's point about what are you doing on the plant-based diets and how are you engaging people there, obviously it's a delicate operation because of cultural differences. But what we're trying to do is to get out this message about the need for balance. Not necessarily that everybody needs to become vegans overnight, but they need much more balance in their diet. So eating more vegetables, legumes and pulses. And we try to do that through nudging consumers, working more with our member states as well and giving better information. On Stefano's point about sustainable production has to be the affordable choice. I think that really is the challenge. I think that Francesco was giving some thoughts there about how it can be done through the food banks, but I think it also needs to be done more generally. And we always need to keep that principle in mind, and that's what we've been trying to do, that what we want is to make the easy choice, the more sustainable choice, the more affordable choice as well. It's not easy, of course, it's perhaps easy to say that in terms of the mantra, but we really have to try and translate that, and we have to work with industry to do that. I think, as you say, Karen, when we get them to make commitments, we're getting them to make commitments around the reformulation, around the way they give information, but also there is a responsibility on those in the middle of the chain to make sure that those who are at the front of the chain and those who are at the bottom of the chain as well, in terms of the consumers, those who are picking up the food, are getting a fair deal. I wanted, if I may, just to mention in closing two things that I thought was interesting about what Lana said, which was the engagement of youth. At the Food Systems Summit, we saw that very clearly and we really welcome it. We've been trying from the EU side as well. We have something called the EIT, the Institute of Technology, which has a food component, and there we have a youth manifesto. Again, that focuses very much on affordable, sustainable food. It needs to be affordable, it needs to be accessible, and there needs to be a greater awareness. But I really think bringing youth into this is crucial, both in terms of helping us to calibrate the messages. But then the last thing I wanted to mention is citizens in general and bringing them in to get them having a better understanding of what goes on in the food system. Of course, we're all consumers, so we have a certain understanding. But on the food waste issue there, over a period of 6 months, we had several panels. Fortunately, citizens were actually willing to work over the weekends, give us their ideas, and to really buy into this process of what we've been doing on food waste. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Burry. And while we were listening to you, we were also very lucky that we finally now have the the Minister for Finland in the panel. Minister Mikkonen, we are so happy that you are joining us, but we are also very happy that you came directly from negotiating and meetings. And I'm trying to look at your face whether or not you look happy or you know, irritated or hopeful or hopeless, but I'll leave that up to you to comment if you want to comment on that, because what I would very much like to hear from you, if I may already, is that in this round we are talking about public policies and strategies that are required to improve the availability of foods that can promote healthy and sustainable diets. And it would be very interesting for us to actually listen to the Finnish approach to implement these targets and these policies in action, both in Finland, but of course also internationally. So please, Minister, the floor is yours.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, and apologize me for being so late. You know the reason that this is the dynamics of the global climate meetings, and fortunately enough, the presidency now finally managed to table a compromise, which won't be the final one, I would say. Now we had the EU ministerial meeting just where I'm coming from, and definitely we need to get amendments and changes to this text. This is not enough. There's clear majority of global community, global nations, global population understanding that we need to phase out from fossils. It's not an option to lock into a situation where we pretend that we can live as we've used to, and even with using some technological tools to go on with fossils, it's not acceptable, and we need to have this clear. Of course, there is tens of questions in the overall COP conclusions, but this is the core, that we need to have a decisive policy in the minutes of this Congress in this sense, and it's the meaning of this Congress is also to send the message for world audience, especially financial and business community, that if you invest out of fossils, if you invest to clean technologies, then you are on the right side of the history, you are on the profitable side of the history, and if you stick to the fossil economy, then you are on a losing path, and this must be quite clear. Then it's of course details that whether we have certain exact dates or years or so. It's we are already going forward if we say loudly that we believe in a post-fossil world. And overall, I would say that there is many positive sides also from this 7 days or 10 days, how you calculate, but it's anyway the first time in the world history when we are actually seriously drafting texts about post-fossil world and phasing out. It's never been possible, and in current times we are more ripping apart any agreements in the world. We are having new wars, we are disagreeing about trade things, and this must be an arena where we see one dimension of our common activities which we must agree together, and it's climate. And definitely so Finland as a country which is not maybe in the easiest spot also energy-wise, we are a cold country, we don't have abundant hydro resources, for example, as some of our neighboring countries fortunately have. They also share it sometimes with us. We have also been importantly dependent on fossil fuels in 20th century especially, but we are on a path to quite ambitious change. What we've achieved is that we have 95% fossil-free electricity system already. It's a remarkable change in 20 years, I would say. We use nuclear, we use wind, we use hydro, but we've switched already. That heating is now ongoing. heavy industry is also in a very well-positioned transformation. I think that we are able to speed up even that way to get emissions down. What is more challenging in our circumstances, it's the land use sink, but also when it comes to our item at the table right now, it's about consumers and consuming things. And there, of course, food is something which is very core. And also in Finland, if we are thinking about how to go forward with healthy and sustainable living, both its diets and foods are important. And I would lie if I would say that we have some one way forward that, okay, do this, then you will be out of unsustainable food habits or having solved the problem. No. In Finland it has been also a very long path. We actually used to have a starvation of population like about a bit more than 100 years ago, and still when my father went to comprehensive school in 1946, there was very undeveloped circumstances in Lapland, which was also burned those times in the end of the war. But then quite fast after that we developed the free of charge school diet, and I think that that's been actually quite important part of our path towards healthy diets and giving a possibility for each and all to at least have one warm meal per day. And nowadays, of course, even ever more important to have also sustainable diets, and I think that also here one pilot process is schools and how we can change the concentration of the food system there, and that's something that we've been doing also in pilot cases, and now according to quite recent study already almost 100% of secondary schools in cities in Finland serve a vegetarian alternative on a daily basis, so we every day have both veterinarian and other alternative. For example, in second, or actually, well, it's a third largest city in Finland, Vantaa, we have a project where we are piloting 30% smaller carbon footprint when it comes to daily lunches. So it's quite remarkable changes that we can do without significant additional costs. And it's important to share also experiences, and that's why we've joined the Emirates Declaration on Resilient Food Systems, which was launched actually here at COP28, and I was discussing with the Minister of Environment of the Arab Emirates about this project a few hours ago, and actually she was very interested about Finnish way to do it, and mentioned that she visited Helsinki and also Finnish schools and actually liked the school food so much that she took several portions of the food dose that day for the lunch. So there are some examples how we are going forward, and we've also been together with France establishing the School Meals Coalition initiative, and we would like to do all what we can to maybe also help, but also learn ourselves how to go forward with sustainable diet also when it comes to public ordered food. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Minister. Allow me just a very short follow-up to you, because the Nordic nutrition recommendations, it sounds like you already have them implemented in the school meals, but I would just also, maybe you're talking about the public and so on, but this role of these recommendations to you, I mean, what kind of opportunities do you see in this dietary shift in general, I mean, at large for your country?
Well, yeah, it's an important aspect, and I think that it's been a very important part already for a long time in Finland. The nutrition recommendations. I remember from my childhood when we in Finland we visit we have several inspections for small children and their families, and always there were also these diet recommendations given in quite meaningful and understandable format also for a small child, a quite small child. And we've now recently published new Nordic nutrition recommendations, as you very well know, and we find it very important that there we have a common scientifically based understanding of the way forward, and it creates basis also for our national dietary guidelines, integrating both health and environmental targets in that sense. And definitely, as I already mentioned, I think that the public food procurement is of course the concrete vehicle then also to actually make to concrete everyday life the nutrition instructions first, and then they will be taken also to private life more easily. So this is probably what we are trying to do, and we are, as I mentioned, we want to stress that there is no clear-cut answers to anything. It's always changing views and learning from experiences from other states. So we are also interested to that. And there is many also alternatives which actually Finland has developed, but is not first of those who use. For example, in Singapore, actually, you can already have ice cream containing solein, a protein which is produced with single-cell organisms and common gases from air, by a Finnish company, Solar Foods. And it's about maybe 5 years ago when I remember I was in a campus area in Lappeenranta University, and then there was a container with solitaire solar food container where they then said to me, okay, that do you want to taste what kind of this, and what is this? This is food from air. So this is not from any farmer, and it was interesting. You can do many things by this kind of smart engineering also. So and also if we're thinking about we are a dairy country, we've been drinking very much milk, and I think that still it's part of the identity almost in Finland that especially children, but quite many adults as well drink milk. And now more and more, of course, development is done by major dairy companies like Valio in inventing plant-based alternatives and using also biotechnology and not the most obvious solutions from here. So I think we really are on a path to different kind of
Thank you.
economy.
Definitely. Thank you so much for sharing that with us and taking, well, really going on board in the Nordic nutrition recommendations. We are running so much out of time because we have also arranged a whole expert panel. And I'm so sorry that I'm not getting back to the rest of the panel here. And I know that you even wanted to reply some of the comments, but please do that afterwards. So just give a round warm applause to ministers, Minister Hatunen and Lana and Shakuntala, and Mrs. Berg online, and also Francesco here. And thank you so much for joining us in the panel. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Lawrence Haddad. You're the Executive Director of GAIN. And Lawrence, you are taking over this mic because you're going to guide us through the next panel of this event, focusing on the evidence and the research. So welcome, Lawrence, and you're already waving at the panel, so I think we'll do a very quick shift here. Lawrence, I hand over the microphone, and the water glasses for you are being shifted out as well, so you have clean glasses.
Thank you, colleagues, for staying this long. We are a small but perfectly formed panel. Good things come in small packages. Like the best nutritious foods, we are available, we are affordable, and we hope to show that we are delicious. This is a panel of experts. I like to call them researchers because they're fantastic. We have two fantastic researchers with us. They are Dr. Rune Blomhoff. Dr. Blomhoff is a professor at Oslo University, and he's the project lead of the Nordic Nutrition Recommendations from 2023. And we have Dr. Maddie Murphy, who's a senior lecturer and researcher at the University of the West Indies. Let me just make a few introductory comments, and then we'll get right to it. So, food systems. Food systems represent an incredible opportunity, unlimited opportunities. Why? Because we're talking about multiple outcomes: livelihoods, resilience, nutrition, climate, environment. We're talking about multiple domains. It's not just about food production, it's not just about consumption, but it's about everything in between. Processing, storage, transport, finance, marketing, retailing. All of these spaces create opportunities. It's about multiple sectors. It's not just about agriculture or health or social protection or water or trade. It's about all of them. And it involves multiple stakeholders. The private sector is essentially driven. The food system is essentially driven by the private sector. The public sector sets the guardrails, sets the incentives, but the private sector essentially drives it all. But with all of these opportunities, these are only opportunities if we can actually navigate this space. Right? It's complicated to navigate this space. There are all kinds of trade-offs. So policy has to be able to navigate it, but it can only do it if it has the evidence, right? We like to think at the highest level, and Minister, I'm not looking at you, the highest level, we like to think of evidence-driven policy making, right? That's what we like to think of. Sometimes we get policy-driven evidence generation. Depends on what the policy is, that can be okay. Sometimes we get fingers crossed policy making. We don't have any evidence. And sometimes we get don't care about the evidence policy making. So evidence is really important. It's not the be-all and end-all of policy. There's politics involved, there's capacity involved, there's timing involved. But evidence is absolutely critical. I don't think there's ever been a premium on good research. I don't think it's ever been higher. So with that, let me, you can tell I was a former researcher. With that, let me pass to Rune first of all. Rune was the lead author of the NNR for 2023, and these have been regularly updated since 1980. And the current recommendations that Karen in the forward of the recommendation says is very brave. Bravest step yet to include environmental concerns into food consumption recommendations. So Rune, can you, and as the ICANN report that Dr. Tedros mentioned, very few food-based dietary guidelines do this, very few. So Rune, tell us what difference, if any, incorporating environment made into your findings, and what were the evidence gaps that you most wish you could fill?
In NNR 2023, we needed, of course, to assess a much larger evidence base than in the previous editions with only health outcomes. So environment added a lot to the already huge evidence base of health effects. We needed to add a large number of environmental scientists to our multidisciplinary team of several hundred health and methodology experts. A main conclusion of NNR is that integration of environment support and often strengthen the healthy dietary guidelines. What is good for health is also good for environment. There are little conflict and there are large synergies. We conclude that there is strong and convincing evidence for shift to a more plant-based dietary pattern in the Nordic and Baltic countries. We recommend a predominantly plant-based diet, about 500 to 800 grams of vegetable, fruit and berries per day. We recommend pulses, potatoes, 90 grams of whole grains per day. We recommend 300 to 450 gram fish per week, 20 to 30 gram nuts per day. All of these recommendations are both supported by health and environment. Then, red meat, we advise that the red meat should be lower than 350 gram per week. That is based on health effects. And then we state it should be considerably lower based on the environment in the Nordic and Baltic countries. We advise moderate intake of low-fat dairy products and minimal intake of processed meat, alcohol, processed foods containing high amounts of fat, salt, and sugar. So then the gaps, the research gap or evidence gap. There are a lot of drivers in the existing food system which is not, that drives the existing food system. So I think we should stop or reduce the support of the drivers in the existing food system. The main evidence gap, I think, is now to identify the barriers in the existing food system that resist the shift to a more plant-based food system. Consumer barriers exist in all domains and policy levels of current food system. So I think that is really important. And then integrated and coherent approaches to achieve synergistic effect is needed. We should deal with trade-offs in outcome and address possible reactions that counteract the intended effects. Policies need to go far beyond the information provision to food consumers. The policies behind the whole system needs to be updated and improved.
So thank you, Rune. So I picked up on the gaps, consumer insight. We need more research on what drives consumers to buy certain foods. I picked up policy coherence. How do we make policy a bit more coherent across sectors? Picked up political economy issues. What's driving the food system? And then issues around trade-offs. We don't know enough about the trade-offs. Given that the environment and health and nutrition guidelines were so well aligned, what do you think the prospect, and I'm going a little bit off script here, what do you think the prospect is for recruiting environmental champions to become champions for nutrition? I mean, if these two things are so well aligned, becoming a nutrition champion for an environment champion is one and the same thing, and vice versa. Do you see that happening?
To me, as a nutritionist, it has really been a surprise to see that the food system has not been a big part of the previous COPs. So I'm really happy that it's now improving, and that there was a whole food systems day, and that we are sitting here. So I think there are signs of improving, but there is a lot of options, and there is lost opportunities there that we haven't dealt with yet. So I really hope that the environmental experts and the nutritionists can collaborate much more, because we have a common goal.
Okay, thank you, Varun. Maddie, let me turn to you. You work a lot on small island developing states, and of course these are the most vulnerable, or among the most vulnerable to climate crisis, and often they have this triple burden of malnutrition. And we often treat these burdens of malnutrition as separate crises, and the climate crisis as separate from the triple burden. But it feels like this COP has sort of said we can't afford to do that anymore. So how can an environmental lens, Maddie, help improve nutrition outcomes in the Caribbean and the Pacific? And can a nutrition lens in the other direction, can it actually help the environment?
Yeah, thanks for that, Lawrence, and thank you for inviting me to be on this panel this evening. And I think the first thing I need to do is set some context in terms of what has actually happened in small island developing states, such as the Caribbean region and the Pacific region. So as you mentioned, there's lots of vulnerabilities when it comes to climate change. So we have rising sea temperatures that's affecting our marine ecosystems. We have droughts, floods, typhoons, hurricanes that are affecting our food production on land. And while we're having that, we also have this health and nutrition crisis where we are the countries that are most affected or have the highest rates in some cases of obesity, type 2 diabetes, and other nutrition-related non-communicable diseases. So for example, in 80% of our SIDS, we have 1 in 6 people who will die prematurely, and that's before their 70th birthday, from an NCD. And the flip side of that is that we have in countries such as Haiti in the Caribbean, and in Vanuatu and the Solomon Islands in the Pacific region, we have 1 in 5 children who experience childhood stunting. So that's the undernutrition side. So there is a lot going on. I work with a group of researchers, the Community Food for Planetary Health group, which is a group of us researchers globally working in SIDS and other small islands as well. And what we do is a lot of work in terms of looking at food systems, and we've done this work over the last 10 years or so with different projects. And you know, it was said before in the previous panel, you know, food systems are different. It's not just all one food system. Every country has a different food system, and what we've tried to do is take our time to map out these food systems. So we use a system dynamics approach in doing that, and it's been really quite not just interesting work, but you know, just understanding food systems in different places and the different nuances and things like culture and you know, the social aspects as well as the socio-demographic issues that come with it. It's you know, it's nuanced, it's complex. And what we tend to do a lot of times is we do group model building. And with this particular method, what we do is we bring different stakeholders, and we've heard this at COP in terms of the need to bring multi-stakeholder engagement, and that's exactly what we do with this type of research, is we bring farmers, food producers, people from government ministries, technical advisors, academics, consumers. We try to bring everyone in the room to say, let's build a map. In our case, because I come from public health, we build that map with the outcome of how do we improve diet, how do we improve nutrition as our end goal. But the idea is then to see what this map looks like for our food systems around diet. And it's always interesting because the maps are usually quite a lot of similarities, but then you see, you know, the little differences in certain places in terms of, especially when it comes to things like culture and gender. But of course, inevitably, there's always a part of the map that is focused on food production, on climate change. And what's nice is that it's a visual where people can actually sit in the room. They've all come together to try to build this map. And you can see the linkages, and you can see what we call the loops sometimes, that the reinforcing loops in some cases, where we can see, you know, what's happening and how climate change is feeding into food production, which can then feed into improved diets.
Can I jump in here, Maddie? Because I want to, you know, in Rune's presentation, in his comments, it's pretty clear that climate and nutrition, or environment and nutrition, are pretty well aligned.
Yeah.
And that's often the way the global debate is framed, in a European, North American way. But I imagine in your context, it's not quite so straightforward.
They are quite aligned, but as I said, there are nuances, and every country is different, even within these SIDS, and even, you know, when you compare the two regions, you know, the Pacific and the Caribbean, where we've done quite a lot of our work. But what we're seeing is that despite those differences, there are some key takeaways that we can, you know, we can pull out that can work across the board and have some transferability. So, you know, you talked about using this environmental lens versus the nutrition lens, and how we kind of use those to help each other. And because we know it's clear that we want diet diversity, that's our outcome, and diet diversity is really looking at, you know, what's on people's plates, you know, how many different types of food groups do they have on there, and within those food groups, how many different types, whether it's, you know, leafy greens or whatever it may be. But those kinds of takeaways where you increase the diet diversity, that's what we want for better nutrition. But that also then comes around to increasing our biodiversity. And when you increase the diversity, we're then going to have better soil quality, better water quality. The idea is that we're really integrating agroecological approaches. So from where we started with our research, we have now gone to a point, you know, we started off really looking at nutrition and health and saying, oh yes, agriculture can help us. We now have a much better understanding of how agroecological principles underpin and can help with the research that we're doing, and we've brought that into the fray, so that now we're not just looking at human nutrition, but we're looking at planetary nutrition and how that circle continues in a positive way.
Thanks, Maddie. Rune, the Nordic Nutrition Review is an incredible process and an incredible report, but I imagine it's pretty resource intensive, and it draws on decades of investment in research. In contexts that have less resources, have less of a research body to draw on, how useful, how relevant, what are the lessons from the NNR process that can be taken or picked up by other contexts?
Of course, the NNR is science advice to the national authorities in the Nordic and Baltic countries, but we suggest that it also offers a framework for other countries and regions, since the health effects of foods, they are universals. Food have the same, with few exceptions, the same health effects on people in all countries. And most of the environmental effect of foods are also global. So, and additionally, development of authoritative high-quality systematic reviews are really resource demanding and methodologically also very challenging. So, and this calls for international collaboration and harmonization. So when this is said, it's also important to remember that the national dietary guidelines must take into account the local context, such as food culture, food availability, public health challenges. So while affluent countries need to move towards a more plant-based food system, situation might be different in other countries where undernutrition is widespread. So this is why one example why the local context is so important also to add, while the science base for health and environment is the same. And finally, I would also like to add that other dimensions of sustainability also are important to consider, such as social sustainability and economical sustainability, of course.
Thank you, Rune. And you mentioned culture, and I want to come to you, Maddie, finally on culture, because in your work you argue for, not just focusing on individual choices and individual responsibility. I'm getting two fingers. I hope that's in a good way from our moderator over there. You talk about culture. Individual responsibility can only go so far if the culture around you gives you limited choices. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so, there's a lot of work to be done around our food environments. I think we've had such a focus on individuals and expecting consumers to make certain choices, but we're not really giving them food environments to make good choices. So, it's about having policies in place that really help our food environments. In Barbados, where I'm based, for example, we have the sugar sweetened beverage tax. And that's something that came with, a lot of, fanfare and controversy in terms of a small island doing this and what that means. But the fact is, it was done, and it could be done even in a small island where you expect that, politically and with developed countries and big companies coming in, that this would be something very difficult to do. The reality from a consumption point of view is that food is driven by affordability, accessibility, availability, and quality, and that's the nutrition quality. And what we're really trying to do is focus on that quality piece. We want to get better food environments, better nutrition. But the bottom line is consumers are driven by the affordability. That's what we've heard, and that's what we know. So it's about balancing that scale and finding that balance. We need to have, strong leadership and strong policies that speak to things, especially, I haven't heard as much in the events I've been to with COP around trade. But, for example, in SIDS, 60 to 90% of our food is imported. So, a lot, when we talk about food environment, we have to then really take a hard look at what we're bringing in, and whether we take bold moves with policies in terms of, the same way we're looking at banning trans fats. Do we ban certain types of ultra-processed products that we know are completely unhealthy for our populations? So I think there's still some work to be done in the policy arena, but I think we really need to take a little shift in terms of where we're looking at. And we also need, even if we're looking at things like trade, I think that that siloing, we need to get away from that. And clearly that's not just in SIDS, that's everywhere. But this idea that you really need health, you need climate change, you need different players, multi-sectoral players, when we're creating policies to really understand the nuances of what's happening in different systems.
Thank you, Maddie. Thank you, panelists. Let me just wrap up. I thought both your contributions were fascinating. Thank you. Look, aligning food, nutrition, climate, environment is a job for not just policymakers, it's a job for businesses, consumers, and researchers. The Nordic nations have given us a really inspiring model. The SID situation is really challenging, but Maddie has given us hope that there's a way to navigate that. And I love the fact that you brought in trade policy. We haven't heard much about that in this debate. It's really, really important. I hope you can agree with me, colleagues, that without evidence, we are just flying blind. And the stakes are just far too high to do that. So please, round of applause for our panel.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lawrence, Rune, and Maddie. This is really interesting, and you really, also you gave us food for thoughts. I mean, what a rich and diverse discussion we are having here tonight. And time is really running, so I have an absolute pleasure to end this session by giving the floor here, the microphone here, to Ms. Helena Teklu. You can now come up to me and take over here and give us your final remarks, because Mrs. Teklu is a champion of climate change, a youth ambassador, a climate reality leader, and so much more. So I'm very grateful that we do have young leaders like yourself here at COP. So please, could you reflect on what you've heard here tonight, and also give us your vision of what needs to be done moving forward? Tekla, the floor is yours, and you have absolutely no more than 4 minutes.
Thank you very much. My name is Helena Teklu from Ethiopia. And as we all know, climate change has a significant impact on the availability, accessibility, and nutritional quality of food, which in turn can affect individuals' ability to maintain a healthy and accessible diet. And so, what strategies can be implemented to address the effects of climate change on food security and the accessibility of nutritious foods? To mention a few, working on implementing sustainable water management practices such as rainwater harvesting, drip irrigation, and efficient water use, improving food shortage and distribution infrastructures can reduce post-harvest loss and ensure a more reliable food supply. And promoting nutrition education and awareness can help individuals make informed dietary choices. Also, governments and international organizations can implement policies that address food security in the context of climate change. So in order to mitigate health impacts, public health initiatives and equitable access to nutritious food plays a crucial role. By implementing these strategies, it's possible to work towards a more resilient and sustainable food system. The youth is the future, and they need to be included in solving climate change, food security, and health. As a young entrepreneur, I believe we, the youth, have the power to challenge social norms, promoting attitudes and behaviors that prioritize sustainability, health, and food security. By promoting inclusivity, diversity, and equity, we can foster a more resilient and sustainable society that benefits everyone. In conclusion, to address the impacts of climate change on healthy and accessible diets, it's essential to implement strategies that promote sustainable agriculture, food security, and equitable access to nutritious foods. This may include supporting climate-resilient agriculture, agricultural practices, improving food distribution systems, promoting nutritious education, and advocating for policies that address the intersection of climate change, food security, and public health. By taking a holistic approach to addressing the impacts of climate change on food system, it is possible to work towards ensuring that individuals have access to healthy and accessible diets, even in the face of challenging times. As I always say, change begins at home. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Maybe I stressed you because you speak very fast, but very important messages from you. Thank you so much. And also, time is up now, and I really want to thank all of our speakers, and thanks to the audience that showed up here today, and also all of you following us online. We know that the online connection in the beginning with the very important message from WHO was not really getting through to the online audience. So I think what we should do, because we have 1 minute or maybe 2 minutes left, is it possible that we can run the video again from the WHO Secretary General? We can. And the audience, you've seen it before, but you can see it again, and then our online audience can see it. So having said that, just thank you all. We are looking forward to the continued collaboration. Thank you.
Your Excellency, Minister Yasmin Fuad, Your Excellency, Minister Kai Mikanen, Secretary General Karen Ellman, Excellencies, dear colleagues and friends, Our food systems are harming the health of people and planet. Food systems contribute to over 30% of greenhouse gas emissions and account for almost 1/3 of the global burden of disease. Transforming food systems is therefore essential by shifting towards healthier, diversified, and more plant-based diets. If food systems delivered healthy diets for all, we could save 8 million lives per year. Nordic countries have been trailblazers for many policy breakthroughs, including for linking climate and nutrition. Thank you for your leadership in this area and for organizing this discussion to share experiences and lessons learned. WHO is committed to supporting countries to develop and implement policies to improve diets and fight climate change. Last year, under the leadership of the Egyptian COP27 presidency, WHO and our partners launched ICAN, the Initiative on Climate Action and Nutrition. The ICAN baseline report currently shows low integration of climate and nutrition in policies, in funding mechanisms, and particularly in the private sector. I'm therefore very pleased that over 130 countries have signed the COP28 UAE Declaration on Climate and Health. Together, we can protect and promote the health of both people and planet. I thank you.